right here on TV 29. You're watching TV 29, bringing you local government information for the Tri-Valley.
Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the September 11th meeting of the Livermore City Council. I now call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Carling.
Here.
Councilmember Coomer.
Here.
Councilmember Warner. Here. Vice Mayor Steven Spadowski.
Here.
And Mayor John Marchand.
Here, thank you. Ask you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'd like to ask the indulgence of the audience. This is the 16th anniversary of the attack of September 11th. And I would just like to ask for a moment of silence to remember the first responders who ran into the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon when everyone else was running out, and to remember the victims and their families. So if you please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Thank you. City Attorney, was there any action taken in the closed session that would be reportable?
No, Mr. Mayor, there was no reportable action taken.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to proclamations and presentations, we have the Airport Commission annual update. And for that, we have Airport Commission Chair Alex Shazifi.
Honorable Mayor, Marchand, City Council members, I'm here to deliver an update regarding Livermore Airport. First, I'd like to welcome my new airport manager who's here with us, David Decoteau, and good job on the selection.
A little closer.
Selection committee. Our Public Works Director did a great job. And what did we do last year? Last year we had a federal grant to repave and put new lights in both runways. So now we have runway lights on both runways lights. Still have an ongoing issue with the directional visibility. Other than that, it's all completed. Today, the commission meeting, Tower Chief informed us that they're converting old analog radios to digital radios, and it should be done by the end of October, and that will greatly enhance the quality and distance for the communications for the tower. And we had a pretty well-attended 800 to 500 people open house last year, and I know some of you were there, so invite you for this year as well. What else? Okay, FBO displayed the services and aircraft, and a good time with Head Ball. Okay, airport is continuing to maintain its excellent safety record, hasn't had a fatality in the last 20 years. Well, small runway incursions, still working on those safety issues, but other than that, we haven't had any major incidents of any kind in the last 20 years. And we're continuing providing safe and efficient environment for the general aviation purposes to the Tri-Valley area. Any questions?
Councilmember Carling?
Thanks for the report. I didn't understand what you said about I understood what you said about the lights, but then you said something about you're still having trouble with...
Oh, the lights are directional, so when you approach the runway on your final approach, the lights are very well visible, as Bob Warner and the mayor flew with me and saw them. But when you come from the side, because they're directional, you can't see them from the side, so you can fly parallel to the runway and look down, you won't see the runway.
Are you supposed to be able to do that?
Well, yeah, you're supposed to know what the runway is before you land on it.
Well, what are we doing about fixing that then?
Well, unfortunately, our new airport manager is an expert in airport lighting and is working with the FAA to fix that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Somebody's working on that.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
thanks.
I'll just say, it's
Everything, right?
it's quite dramatic. I mean, you're going along.
What
Drama-
worried about?
dramatic.
Dramatic. I mean, you want to, you're in the pattern and you want to see where you're going to land and it's not there. I mean,
I get
But
it, that's
then
why I was
should-
asking the question. Okay.
Okay, anything else?
Any questions? Great. Keep up the great work. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
It's a tremendous regional asset, so thank you for managing that for us. And again, welcome to our new airport manager, David. Moving on to the confirmation of advisory body appointments and reappointments. So we got a whole lot of folks here that are stepping up to serve the community, and greatly appreciate all of you taking the time to do that. So I need a motion to approve the appointments and reappointments.
I'll move to approve the appointments and reappointments.
Okay, and then I would also like to ask the new appointees to come forward as I call your name for the administration of the oath of office. So for the Historic Preservation Commission, we have Michelle Setchell. The Livermore Youth Advisory Commission youth members, we have Schluck Bansal, Madeline Lovedahl, Amelia Nelson, Ashley Zhuang. For the Livermore Area Youth Advisory Commission reappointments, Ellie Duell, Maggie Rosenden, Meenakshi Singhal, Cheryl Stanley, Elisa Zhang, and the reappointment of Ann Brown. So we have a motion and a second for all of those. All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. So if I ask Deputy City Clerk to administer the oath of office. That way you're all on camera.
solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
To the Constitution of the United States.
to the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I take this obligation freely.
that I take this obligation freely
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
And that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
discharge the duties upon which I will about to enter.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for volunteering your time. And this is why Livermore is such a remarkable community, is because people like you that step up and make a difference. So thank you all. With that, we've got moving up to the Citizens Forum. We've got, Okay, the Citizens Forum is, these are for items that are not on the agenda. The City Council can neither deliberate nor take action on things that are addressed during the Citizens Forum, although they may be brought back under matters initiated. But again, the City Council cannot deliberate nor take action. Working through the... Okay. All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay, we have David McGuigan, Alan Burnham, and Brian O'Reilly. Mr. McGuigan.
On June 26, a Mr. Barker came before this council to discuss actions taken to suppress some information in the trial of an officer. On July 24th, Mr. Akala confirmed that this involved the trial of ex-officer Dan Black, and these motions were made in response to a pitchless motion. He said it was just a common courtesy provided to all officers. Well, it turns out that to no surprise, you are not being honest with the people of Livermore. I did a little research, and I came across this nice little paper prepared for the League of California Cities by the Chief Assistant City Attorney for Burbank, entitled Fundamentals of Opposing Motions for Discovery of Police Officer Personnel Records, Pitchless Motions. It talks about how there were indeed common requests typically filed by the defense to get information that could be used to discredit officers' testimony as a witness. One would certainly expect the city to defend the officer in normal performance of his duties, but that's not what we have here. First, the officer was the subject of the prosecution. Acting on his behalf when he is charged with a crime is certainly not common. Second, the police report and the crime report are not common personnel documents. Okay, maybe in Livermore, but not in communities where the police aren't getting arrested. Third, and perhaps most important, in Chapter 11 of this document, they talk about when the DA is making the requests. It turns out that when the officer is being prosecuted, the DA is entitled to the personal information. So denying the DA information they have a right to is certainly not common. Now, anybody want to speculate what happens to the DA's case when the police report and the crime report are suppressed? No wonder the girl had an medical emergency. Who can blame her for having a nervous breakdown upon hearing that this counsel was acting deliberately to destroy the case against the man who exploited her? Using the DA's term for the man, it begs the question, why did this counsel act deliberately to help put a sexual predator back on the street? I mean, I get your support for perjury and evidence tampering. Good statistics make for easy re-elections, right? But this is a man in his late 40s exploiting a teenage girl. Just what does he have on you? This is no common defense of a man acting in accordance with his legal duties. This is a deliberate and disgusting exercise of this counsel's power that destroyed the prosecution's case and should have been done by a vote. I'd like to know when that vote was held so I can figure out how you sick people slipped this by everybody. And if it wasn't done by a vote, you need to explain how this council can deliberately act to help put a sexual predator back on the street and the public has absolutely no opportunity to tell you, don't do that. And you could perhaps clear up one other thing. When you asserted there were no allegations of child abuse, was that before or after you suppressed the child abuse report?
Question for the city attorney. Did this council take any action as suggested by Mr. McGuigan?
No, then if I may, Your Honor, Jason Alcala, City Attorney for the City of Livermore. An actual motion, it's called a pitchless motion, was brought by the prosecuting district attorney in this particular matter. The prosecuting district attorney also had access to those records, came to the police department and reviewed them, poured over all the documents in this particular gentleman's file. However, in order to introduce those into trial, they were required to file a proper motion, and they did. And that motion has never been requested. It's a public record. No one has ever requested that from my office. It's at my office, and it's also at the courthouse. The full motion and the opposition can be found there. And the DA acknowledges that they did have access to it, and they were actually looking for additional documents for the purpose of trial. But they did have access to his entire file.
But this council took no action in that regard?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Ellen Burnham, Brian O'Reilly, Nancy Bankhead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm here this evening to highlight an issue related to the decision timeline for downtown development. The issue is common to and transcends all four conceptual designs being discussed. All four concepts have public facilities involving art and science, but to different extents. One of the learnings put forth in the committee meetings was that these facilities need some degree of private support to be viable. So my concern is that we really won't have enough information to make a decision on what to include and what not this fall. Stepping back, I'm sure you all know that project planning involves a series of steps involving project definition, design requirements, conceptual designs, preliminary engineering, detailed engineering, and construction. I've been the line manager for several facilities ranging in cost up to tens of millions of dollars, so I understand what can go right and wrong during this process. We are now someplace into the design requirement conceptual design phase. Once a conceptual design is agreed upon, you can have some degree of concurrency in how you proceed on the other steps, but proceeding too fast on any one aspect can lead to some undesired constraints in the latter phases of the project. Of the proposed public facilities, I'm personally personally most interested in a science learning center. I think science literacy is important at all levels for economic competitiveness and for good public policy decisions. I frequently see a lack of science literacy in newspaper articles, letters to the editor, and public hearings, and I would hope that we could improve upon that. I've just started polling the interest of my scientist friends for such a center, and I'm getting a very positive response. Tonight, however, I merely note that it will take at least a year to determine the form and financial viability of such a science learning center. The same may be true for other potential facilities, including, for example, a small performing arts facility. This chicken and egg problem could lead to one of the facilities being blocked out of the plan unless space is reserved for them until good decisions can be made in a timely manner. Of course, this phased decision process should not delay the entire project. There will be a need for temporary parking and laydown areas as the development progresses. These areas could be the site for these latter stage facilities. I urge the City Council to address this issue and direct the staff and PlaceWorks to actively consider these phased decision and related construction issues as part of arriving at the final conceptual plan for downtown development. I also think that it would be appropriate to have a special meeting for nonprofits to get together to discuss the realities and synergism amongst the various possible new nonprofit facilities in the downtown. Such a specialized meeting would be more effective for this specific purpose than the neighborhood meetings that are already on the plan, and I will offer to organize that interaction if it so pleases the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham. And just a point of information, there's a group called the Tri-Valley Nonprofit Alliance, and you might acquaint yourself because there's a lot of horsepower behind that.
Yes, I've attended some of those meetings.
Okay,
yes.
very good. Thank you. Brian O'Reilly, Nancy Bankhead, Kathy Streeter.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the Council. My name is Brian O'Reilly, and I'm a board member of Interfaith Housing in Livermore. We have 3 facilities, and we have 209 residents in our facilities, 209 apartments. These are HUD financed, so someone with about $1,000 a month income comes to one of our apartments, they're going to pay about less than $300 a month for rent, because on the HUD rules, affordable is 30% of your income. At the same time, I'm also a volunteer with some food pantries, and I meet senior citizens in the food pantries, and their income is $1,000 a month, but their rent is like $750, $850, or $900, and they tell me, one more rent increase and I'm homeless. In the last year or two, I've noticed several of these people have disappeared, which tells me their rent probably went up and they had to move out of town. There is a critical need right now for affordable senior housing. These seniors who are living on poverty level income per month do not have vast amount of friends and do not have any political clout. They're out there, they're our citizens, we don't see them, but they're there. There is a critical need. Now compare these people to someone living in Arbor Vista, Vineyard Village, or Hillcrest Gardens that we own. If they had 1,000, they're paying less than 300. They're on the outside going to our food pantries, they got 1,000, they're paying the market rate for housing. There is a critical need. Later on tonight you may hear more about Interfaith Housing and our quest to get more housing for the seniors. But we urge you to give that some consideration, that we have seniors who are leaving town because they can no longer afford to live here. And I truly appreciate what the city has done for us in the last several years with Habitat for Humanity and other facilities. You've been wonderful, and we just want you to keep being wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly, and thank you for all of your tremendous efforts for this community. Certainly appreciated. Nancy Bankhead, Kathy Streeter, Donna Caban.
Hello, Nancy Bankhead. I'd like to know what Livermore city official policy is going to be about BART coming to North Livermore. Right now, BART is doing the EIR, and for that they get to take 100 acres of the North Livermore, going all the way up past Hartman Road. And for that 100 acres, they get to buy 400 acres to kill the red-legged frogs and the tiger salamanders. So I'd like to know what Livermore's official policy is about this. Thank you.
As soon as we find out what BART's official policy is, we'll maybe have a little more understanding on that. Kathy Streeter, Donna Caban, Dave Finster.
My comments tonight are for the general populace of Livermore. Friends of Livermore Committee, a local political action committee formed for the purpose of influencing our local elections, is closing shop for now. But in last year's election cycle, the committee spent close to $214,000. $39,000 and change each was spent for Bob Comer and Bob Carling, who both won. Just under $29,000 each was spent in opposition of Stu Gary and Lorene Turner, and almost $35,000 against John Stein. All three lost. This is a lot of money when you consider that a city council candidate usually raises and spends under $10,000 to run. The largest donations came from Gene King, Lynn Seppel, and Jeff Caskey. Lynn's wife Joan owns the Independent newspaper. These four individuals are also members of a group called the Livermore Community Group, which has been working to develop an alternative plan for downtown development. They also serve as members of the Downtown Steering Committee, resulting in the appearance of the Livermore Community Group being overrepresented. The steering committee is tasked with devising a community outreach plan to gather community input on our downtown redevelopment. 3 examples of what the downtown redevelopment might look like were developed. A 4th professionally produced plan was introduced by Seppala's Gene King and Jeff Caskey. A number of steering committee members felt that the introduction of a plan by a subgroup of the steering committee was inappropriate and appeared to be a blatant effort to try to influence the outcome. They felt the plan should not be included. However, since all the iterations are only meant to be examples of what might be, it has been included in the material to be presented to the public. Check out livermorecitizen.com for the most accurate and up-to-date report on the Downtown Steering Committee and future plans for downtown. When we were children, we built things with blocks or Lincoln logs. Depending on how big each block was, the relationship of one block to another, and how they were placed, our efforts resulted in a castle or a fort or a spaceship. It all happened because of the size, shape, and placement of the blocks. It's like your living room. Your blocks are furniture, and how it is arranged makes all the difference. Do you want a couch? If so, how big and where? How much seating and lighting do you want and where? And how much space do you want to move around in? I think of downtown as Livermore's living room, and how we arrange the blocks will make all the difference. The blocks are housing, parking, retail, a hotel, and open space. What would you do with these blocks? You don't need money to have influence on our living room. If you don't want a small group of people with money and influence making decisions for you, all you have to do is show up. Turn off the television one night and attend one of the 7 community meetings that are clearly listed on the city's website. Get up and use your influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Streeter. Donna Caban, Dave Finster, Don Stasa. Ms. Caban?
Good evening, City Council members. My name is Donna Caban, 37-year resident of Livermore, but tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Tri-Valley Sierra Club. The Sierra Club has voted unanimously to endorse the following critical elements of a downtown plan. Number 1, a maximum amount of qualifying open space. Number 2, a West Side hotel. Number 3, the lowest number of housing units required, with a significant portion of any housing built downtown reserved for current Livermore workers and/or current residents who may want to downsize and live downtown. The reasons for our positions. A West Side hotel plan provides the greatest amount of open space. A West Side hotel plan will provide a more aesthetic and integrated plan with greater pedestrian access. A West Side hotel plan does not require valet parking with hotel cars being shuttled across Railroad Avenue. A West Side hotel plan retains the possibility for the lowest number of housing units in the immediate planning area. We strongly urge the City Council to consider the fewest housing units possible and to give top priority for any units approved downtown to current workforce residents. Those workers critical to the safe functioning of the city, firemen, policemen, nurses, teachers, and city employees may not be able to afford living where they work. As a result, hundreds are forced to commute long hours to and from Livermore. Other cities in the Bay Area have used a ranking system on city-owned properties, such as the downtown parcel, to ensure a significant portion of housing is reserved for this critical workforce. We encourage all residents to attend the upcoming workshops or participate online to help design a vital and vibrant downtown Livermore for our families and for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caban. Dave Finster, Don Stasa, Cal Wood.
Good evening. My name is Dave Finster. I'm a fourth-generation Livermore resident and the current president of the Livermore Stockmen's Rodeo Association. I'm here in support of a downtown park. The Rodeo Association thinks this would be a fabulous idea for the city. Kind of envision a half-acre to three-quarter-acre park. And when you walk into this park, you'd kind of have maybe some hardscaping and a statue of some sort for our veterans from all wars, but going back to the original deal the city had with the Rodeo Association, also acknowledging the veterans from the Murray and Pleasanton Township. This park, I think if you were to walk in and go through that hardscape, you would go through that and maybe go to a big grass area. You could have all types of city events there for kids, for families. You could have car shows. And what else it would do is help preserve our history. There's a lot of history in this town that I don't think a lot of our residents are aware of. Like where we're sitting right now, the 33 acres that the Rodeo Association donated to the city back in 1962. So we've got a couple other guys that would like to say a couple things about the park, but overall, I think this would be great for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finster. Don Stasa.
Good evening. My name's Don Stasa. I'm a director of the rodeo and a past president. Just to go follow up what Dave said and give you maybe a little bit more background on what we're talking about. And when World War I started, the Red Cross gave a tax to every city to pay a certain amount of money to support the war effort over in Red Cross over in Europe. The city had no money at that time to pay for this, so the Livermore Stockmen's formed an association and put on a rodeo so they could get the money to put this rodeo on. And as years went by, this rodeo was growing from then. So our rodeo this year, our rodeo will be the 100th rodeo of this city has put on. It's a world-renowned rodeo. It's been known throughout the whole country. We have people come from Europe, all over the world to come here. But as time went on, the city took the grounds that we had the rodeo on, and we moved to Robertson Park with the lease. At that time, we had a certain amount of acreage left over here that was supposed to be dedicated to as a park for the rodeo and to the veterans of World War I, and obviously we've had other wars after that need to be represented also. There was supposed to be a monument built for the Murray Township veterans and the Pleasanton Valley veterans. None of this has been done, and I think we have an opportunity now to fix that. The Rodeo Association is willing to exchange that park for the park down in the downtown plan that will be representative of the Murray Township veterans and the Pleasanton veterans and the Livermore Rodeo Stockmen's Association. I think it's a win-win for the city, and I think it's a win-win for the rodeo and the veterans and the old people, that they're going to be able to move into these houses as well as the veterans. It's a common sense deal. We're providing a bit of history down in our downtown. Agriculture was the biggest part of this valley for a number of years, and now it seems to be put on the back burner, and residents here that work all over the Bay Area and whatnot, they have no idea what our town was or is. And we need to keep history alive in this country. We're destroying it. I think it's very important that we do this. I think that if we make a monument to the veterans, we make a monument like a statue of a cowboy taking off his hat and putting on a helmet. It would show people what this park means to us. And once again, I think it's a win-win for both the city and the rodeo and veterans. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stasa, thank you. And just to point out that when President McGlinchey, John McGlinchey of the Rodeo Association, had that first rodeo, they raised over double the Red Cross assessment for the city of Livermore. And I'd also like to point out that both Robert Livermore and William Mendenhall were both stockmen. So thank you very much for those comments. Cal Wood and Connie Copps.
I'm Calvin Wood, 420 Lincoln Avenue.
That was quick.
You gotta have the time
just
right.
flies, doesn't it?
I'm the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Interfaith Housing Incorporated, which is made up of 8 local churches, Catholic, Protestant, and our local synagogue. For almost 50 years, Interfaith Housing has built and operated apartments for needy senior citizens in Livermore. Our Hillcrest Gardens, Vineyard Village, and Arbor Vista complexes provide a total of 207 one-bedroom apartments. At present, there are some 700 people on the waiting lists for these apartments, and qualified applicants must wait at least 4 years. The acute need for affordable senior housing keeps growing as baby boomers age and rents continue to skyrocket. Interfaith Housing would like to build as many as 100 new apartments on that parcel at the end of Pacific Avenue. This property is subject to the 1962 agreement just referred to between the city and the Livermore Stockmen's Rodeo Association. When the Stockmen deeded 33 acres to the city to create the Civic Center, the agreement stipulated that in addition to providing a new site for the rodeo, the city would create a large centrally located park and recreational facility as a permanent memorial for local residents who have served in the armed forces. Well, 55 years went by, the Central Park was never created. Since the Pacific Avenue property is the only undeveloped piece of the original 33 acres, the Stockmen felt that it would be used for the public park that they were promised rather than senior housing. However, they have recently indicated they would be willing to accept a park in another location and release the city from creating it on Civic Center property. If a Central Park were created in the downtown redevelopment area instead, it would enable the city to make the Pacific Avenue property available to Interfaith Housing for this housing. Such a deal might also result in offsetting a significant portion of the city's $14 million debt obligation on the core downtown property. As it happens, the property is right across the street from our existing Vineyard Village complex. This location has the further advantage that Interfaith Housing might be able to leverage its existing common facilities when building the new units. Building 100 apartments would cost upwards of $30 million. In addition to help from the city's affordable housing funds, the project would also require major funding via low-income housing tax credits. But in order to apply for the tax credits, Interfaith Housing must already own the property. So, in order to provide a much-needed apartment for seniors, Interfaith Housing asked Livermore residents to create a central park in the downtown redevelopment area when considering design elements in the upcoming community meetings. Such a park would commemorate the very substantial contributions of the Stockmen's Association to Livermore history, as well as those of the many area veterans who have given so much to our city and our country. In addition, it would provide a central place for citizens to celebrate their love for this truly great city while providing housing for the old, needy, and often forgotten members of our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. And finally, Connie Copps.
So recently, Cron4 did a report on our malls are not getting as many shoppers. They reported like a 26%, I think, lag behind. And I know our city depends a lot on its mall revenues, which brings me to some past presentations to all levels of government and to almost any place in this community and beyond that uses bags. I invented Games on Bags, which I wanted to partner up with our state lottery and other state lotteries and the major grocery chains like the Mills Corporation, and I guess we're Paragon or the Livermore, San Francisco Livermore outlets now. The bag games, when I first thought of it, and I did contact some people in the government, I just thought positive gaming in general would be kind of fun. And there were problems with the patent when I was doing the patent process. I ran into some things that were unsettled, and when you're dealing with a bureaucracy like the patent office, sometimes you're on hold for like 3 days and you don't get answers and you get a lot of the runaround. But just listening to our people with the housing problem that we're having, and then, other social issues, if people would buy a bag or do a deed in support of a cause like my business, I think, and I know I'd have to be pretty fair not to be greedy about this. I do want, the work I put into it and a little bit beyond, because I blazed a trail on this. I know I did. And big people competed against me. Almost everyone I talked to kind of copied something about it, which is supposed to be a compliment, but really kind of got me super frustrated. But I think that rewards-based gaming for good deeds could really help a lot of some underfunded, rare deals besides housing, Social Security, healthcare. People could buy bags in support or do deeds in support of rarer issues, like ataxia is a disease that my daughter lost a dear friend from early in life, but there's not a lot of scientists on the cures just because there's not a lot of people, that have this. Cystic fibrosis is another one where, it's a horrible, horrible disease, but it doesn't get the funding. So I'd like to revisit this with some community members, stores, organizations, government agencies. I'm going to be beating the pavement, and I'm hoping you guys will have an ear for me, and I can show you some past and future games that I have ideas for. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the Citizens Forum. Yes, I'm going to close the Citizens Forum, and we're going to move on to the consent calendar. These are items that are routine in nature and typically passed with a single motion. I do have a card for comment on 4.04. Is there any other item that anyone would like to pull for discussion? No. Okay. We'll tell you what. Let's do. What we'll do is we'll take comment on 4.04, and then that is the KB Home South Bay Tract Public Improvements, accepting all real property offered for dedication. So at that, Ms. Copps.
So I'm wondering how familiar you are with the packet on the improvements that were made. I guess there's a release of the bonds for the improvements that were made for the Altero community that was built on Bluebell and Las Flores. There's been some questions that I've had in the past about that area, but my main concern has to deal with some digging and some different workers I saw there. On January 26th of 2017, I did put in a public records report asking why there were like 12 to 20 men working there from, and like throughout my Springtown subdivision, there was a lot of people going underground working, and I'd asked my homeowners association board member what was going on, and they didn't know. They were not forthcoming with me, so then I wrote to the city to ask, and this is what I said: I'm looking for a copy of the permit for the work that is being done on Bluebell Drive. Who pulled these permits? 12 to 20 men have been working there between, like, from January 24, 2017 to January 25th and January 26th, plus on and around there were other workers in that area, but this was right in front of those apartments. So with item 404, I believe I got a reply saying, "Dear Ms. Copps, please be advised there are no records responsive to your request," dated January 26, 2017. So I think for item 4.4, you're asked to review like the dedication, which land, how many houses were dedicated. There's really no report in the actual paper, agenda that you got. They do mention something that's been recorded, and I haven't been down to the county to see what that was, but I really want to know what the improvements were that KB was responsible to do for that that building, and I want to make sure you guys know what they were. Because a lot of people are kind of blind to the history on Springtown. And by the way, I really wanted to be at the park meeting today for that, Springtown meeting, and it's like, I just think the left hand has to know what the right hand's doing around here, because Springtown is part of Livermore. There's a meeting going on as we speak, for that, open space that I can't be at. And, in a way I could, it probably wouldn't matter, because every time I go to those meetings, I ask legitimate questions and they don't get answered, and that's really troubling to me, because I think I'm a really good person, and I don't want anything that's above and beyond something that, is fair citizenship, but I feel like I really should have these answers. So why were they working there? What were they doing? What properties were dedicated? How do you know they're done with their obligations? What were they? I hope you know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. I believe it was a public utility easement and emergency vehicle access. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the way this works is that the city does not accept those dedications until the work has been done and the inspections have been completed and everything meets all the city requirements. That's been completed now, and so the city is asking the council to authorize the release of bonds and the acceptance of those improvements.
Those are public masons, so they weren't buildings, they were the right-of-way and the easements.
That's right.
Can I get a...
Move approval.
Oh. Just one more thing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I also like to just make a comment on 4.07. That's the Home Consortium, and those are the funds that we use to create and maintain affordable housing in Livermore. And I would just like to point out that those funds have dropped 50% over the last 5 years. So those are funds that we use, and we leverage those to address what we heard several times tonight about the need for affordable housing. And those HUD funds have been cut 50% in the last 5 years. So we're doing the best we can, and we'll continue to work as best we can to leverage those dollars to provide the most benefit for their community. So thank you. With that, I'd be willing to entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I'll move approval of 4.1 to 4.11.
4.01?
4.01, sorry, yes. I guess that's the whole consent calendar.
There we go.
Could have just done it in all one, but
You just did.
for some reason I'm calling out numbers.
That's okay. Okay, we've got a motion.
Second that.
Seconded by Councilmember Coomber. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to public hearings. Hearing to consider establishing fees for various city services. Doug Alessio is stepping up to the table.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I'm Doug Alessio, your Administrative Services Director. So the item before you tonight is a comprehensive user fee study analysis. The city conducted a comprehensive user fee analysis to establish fees based on the premise that there are certain specific services that the city provides that are of special benefit to individuals or to businesses that should not be the financial responsibility of the general taxpayer. The fees and permits affected are those typically associated with applications and inspection fees charged to users of services provided by the Building Division, Planning Division, Engineering Division, and Fire Inspection functions. The city engaged Matrix Consulting Group to perform the fee study. Matrix Consulting Group is located in Mountain View and has more than a decade of experience performing fee studies and providing relevant analysis to local governments. The study included conducting interviews with appropriate staff, data collection, cost analysis, and culminated with a review and approval of the results with city staff. It has been the previous council direction the majority of the costs for these services be fully recovered by the user fee. The city has not conducted a comprehensive user fee analysis since 2008. The study shows that the city is under recovering costs associated with providing services. Staff is proposing that with limited exception, council adopt the updated full cost recovery fee schedule. Staff would also like direction regarding the development of a user fee policy, which would address industry best practice items such as full cost recovery, frequency of comprehensive review of fees, inclusion of annual fee escalators such as CPI, and the annual adoption of a master fee schedule.
And Paul Spence, your Community Development Director, if I could, I wanted to just touch on a little bit of what we've seen with the fees. So we asked our staff to take a look at how much time they're spending on the fees and the work that they do. For the most part, the fees are increasing by inflation, and the amount of work is not changed much. There are a few examples where, because of regional or state requirements, we are spending more time, in some cases considerably more time. An example would be C3 requirements for stormwater control. We spend quite a bit more time than we used to. Those requirements used to apply just to bigger projects. Now they apply to small infill projects. So that's an example where any kind of a site plan change or approval involves more work than it used to. So that's some of what you see with the changes in the fees. I also wanted to point out that we do have a few fees, only 11, which is a very small number out of your total, that are proposed for some subsidy. And these are generally fees where there is some community benefit, where charging the fee would be a barrier, where we're concerned about safety, these kinds of things. An example is a water heater permit. It's an item where sometimes the homeowner installs it or has a contractor install it. Very important that it be installed correctly so that it's not a danger or a hazard to the home or the homeowner. And so we really want the person to come in and get a permit and to have an inspection. And so we suggest that that fee be lowered and subsidized so that it's not a barrier, so that they wouldn't avoid actually doing that. So there are a small number of fees in that category. We do have key staff here if you have questions on any of the specifics, but with that, we'll turn it back to council. Thank you.
Any questions? Councilmember Carling?
Yeah, so speaking of the 11, either I'm doing my math wrong or you've got some errors in these. If you look at 7, 8, 9, and 10. Well, 1 through 6, you take the 100%, subtract the proposed fee and get the proposed subsidy, but for 7, 8, 9, and 10, you took the cost recover, 100% cost recovery minus the current fee to get the proposed subsidy. So, am I misreading that, or are those subtractions done backwards? See, if you look at the water heater example, shouldn't it be 135 minus 75 to get 60?
So we have a current fee of 37.
Right.
And the full cost recovery would be 135. We're proposing that the fee be increased to 75. But
Right, so
not to
you're
the-
subsidizing $60, not 98.
Right. You are correct.
So 7, 8, 9, and 10 are incorrect on your chart.
I think you are correct. We apologize for that. The proposed fee is accurate for those.
No, I'm not arguing with the
Yeah.
proposed fee. I was just questioning the proposed subsidy.
Right.
Okay, so the other thing that, so there's very little direction, and maybe that's what you're looking at from us, regarding what a reasonable cost recovery policy should be from each of the 4 departments, right? We are well under some of the ones in some of the other more broadly considered, I guess, around the Bay Area, like maybe engineering or something like that. Let's see, I wrote down engineering was 67%, and maybe it's like 80 to 100% some places. So are you looking direction from us as to what a reasonable cost recovery ought to be?
So the slightly longer answer is yes.
That's the short answer.
And we're relying on past practice, which the council's past practice has been 100% fee recovery on all except for the fees that are noted in your staff report. So the overall direction has been mainly for things that are related to either specific benefit or development-related fees, that the taxpayer shouldn't pay for that, but that the actual people who benefit from should completely pay for that. On these 11 fees, they were...
I wasn't talking so much about the 11 fees at this point. I was talking about where the report gets into building, planning, engineering, and fire, right? And there's some suggestion later in here that we ought to come up with what a reasonable recovery policy should be. So the question I had is, are you asking for us to help you determine what that is for each of those 4?
So in the past, while I was researching and preparing it, the staff reports had always made reference to an official council policy that I could never lay my hands on, that there's full cost recovery. So it's really been direction up until this point. What I'd like to do is in the end of January, beginning of February, come back to you with a policy and give you a couple of options or choices about what goes in there. We believe we should be as close to 100% cost recovery, except for the 11 items listed, as possible. And we'd like you to either acknowledge that or to set it at a different level so we have guidance in the future.
You're going to do that? No.
Essentially, the direction would be this evening. The item would return to you as a policy in January, is what we are proposing. So essentially, although we didn't maybe say as clearly as possible, what we'd like to hear is if there's council consensus to do something very different than we've been doing for the past 30 years, which is the 100% recovery. But what we're going to propose to do is actually write that into a policy. And so if you would like us to specifically look at other settings other than the 100% cost recovery.
But we don't do that now.
You would be only giving us general direction. We would bring the actual policy back for your consideration with analysis at January. That is correct. What you're doing tonight is actually considering the specific fees and the specific fee levels for tonight. The second step is a policy moving forward for future consideration of fees.
So we're approving the 11 tonight?
We're approving all of the fees tonight.
The 11.
And all of the other ones with 100% cost recovery. The policy that would return would govern future fee studies and fee development. That's, I think, the thing that's confusing this evening. We're asking you to do 2 things, one thing tonight and one to give us direction for things to happen in the future as far as fees.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Vice Mayor?
Since somebody brought up C3, one of the items that I was looking at was the O&M agreement. Is there an annual, or is there a fee for the annual inspection? Or do you cover that under one fee when they apply? Because now, with the regional board, their permit requirements, again, this is one of the reasons why we have to seek cost recovery on some of these fees. We keep getting more and more requirements put upon us by the state, and yet we have no way to recover the costs. So one of them is the fee that I'm talking about in particular is when a development installs a stormwater treatment device, we are then required on I think it's like a 5-year basis, or now it's a percentage basis, to go out and inspect each one of them to make sure that they're operating properly, but we have no way of recovering that cost. So is that something that we're looking at, or?
So that, Bob Vinn, Assistant City Engineer, that fee that you referenced is a new proposed fee. We currently do not charge anything, and we are currently recovering zero for inspecting stormwater devices.
Okay, because I see that there's an inspection fee, but the total cost per unit is $1,600. So is that per instance, or is that just when they're installed? I didn't.
No,
that's what I didn't see.
That's per inspection.
Per inspection. Okay.
So that would be once every 5 years.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. The only other comment that I had is I like the direction of, or the ask for a policy. I believe that we need some kind of standard so people know what to expect every year, that we can avoid. Again, this is another instance where we're trying to avoid spikes in fee increases if we have a policy that reviews them annually and has possibly a CPI inflator attached. It's less of a hit. Unfortunately, we didn't have, or we weren't enacting that phantom policy that Doug couldn't find. So, it may have lessened the blow, but yeah, I do believe that bringing it back in January, that'd be great.
So I one question. So on some of these fees are, 100% clearly driven by a specific entity that you could then charge. But are there fees that are not so clear? And what's our policy there? Are you going to address that as well? I mean,
For all of the fee types that you have in this study, there's an applicant of some kind. It is either a business, a corporation, a homeowner, a nonprofit. So there is some entity that's always.
So there's no, these fees that you're talking about, 100% recovery, are not in any kind of gray area.
Right.
We will be, however, as Mr. Alessio noted, clarifying the policy underpinnings for essentially your logic as to why the 11 aren't full cost recovery. You see that logic laid out in your staff report. That would become part of your policy. So that, again, as we get new fees or there are other ones that don't fit clearly into a category, that we have some policy guidance as to propose a fee level recovery for you.
I still am a little confused. Sorry for being so slow on the uptake here. The 11 fees I get, and I don't have any issue with those. What I'm struggling with are the current cost recoveries for building, engineering, fire, and planning.
And those are in Exhibit A of your staff report tonight, so you'll see literally dozens of fees listed in that exhibit that they're set at.
I'm looking at attachment 1.
I believe, maybe if I could ask, I believe what you might be asking is, hey, you're saying that our policy has been 100% cost recovery, but it's
No, that's
showing
not what I'm saying.
that it's less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because those were last looked at in 2008. So that's comparing fees that we set in 2008.
No, I get that.
Okay.
Right. But right now, the chart from this company that you hired says that we have current cost recovery percentages in building is 63%, engineering 67%, fire 65%, and planning 76%.
Yes.
And you want to go to 100%
on all of those.
On all of those.
Yes.
But based on their analysis, only the typical cost recovery, and I frankly didn't think their analysis was that good, because it's not very clear. The only two fees that recover anywhere near 100% are building and engineering. Fire only recovers, at least in their analysis, 20 to 40%, yet we recover 65%. So I don't get where you're headed on this.
Well, when we did this in 2008, we brought everything up.
So is this report from 2008?
No. But when we last adopted these in 2008, we were at full cost recovery on everything, and since
Okay.
then we have slipped out of full cost recovery by varying
But why would we go? Why would we go to fire at 100% when right now typically municipalities only collect 20 to 40%? I don't get that.
In other words, why would the city of Livermore be different than a different municipality?
Right.
And the answer is that is based on prior council direction. For example, Pleasanton charged no fire fees at all.
Okay.
And taxpayers completely subsidized the local businesses and applicants on
Okay.
that.
Okay.
They recently changed that. So you are not required to recover any of this. You can essentially provide all of these services based on taxes, so that policy range of zero recovery up to 100%, different cities do that differently.
Oh,
and
okay.
this essentially said, hey, on average, this is what other cities do. You've been, as a city, at the high end of that. You've done 100% cost recovery for development-related fees. Generally, cities that have grown faster or where development is a larger piece of their overall economic activities recover at the higher end of that scale. Cities where development is a very small piece of the puzzle require at a much lower end of that scale, that range between 0 and 100.
So if we had a policy back whenever Paul said that was of 100%, what happened?
You've never had a policy, you've had a practice. And
All
that's
right,
what
sorry.
that's what Mr. Alessio is noting, is that we'd feel much more comfortable if we actually adopted that. So what happened is essentially in the intervening time, there is no cost of living increase in these fees. And so what has happened is either A, the task became much more complex and took much longer, so that increased the hours we were putting into it without an additional recovery,
Okay.
or simple inflation increased during that period of time, causing us to no longer be at 100, but to be at 60 or 40 or some other number.
So this analysis, did you say you're going to do an analysis? Is that what I heard, or not?
The analysis before you this evening sort of notes what the fees would need to be to bring you back to 100.
I get that, but
the
what
policy
about,
would
what,
be
okay, what impact would that have on people that want to develop stuff in the city?
So essentially what this will do is increase the cost of the processing of various applications related to development. As a part of the overall project costs, we're talking about essentially the upfront costs are roughly in the neighborhood of between 5 and 8% of a total development cost of a project. We're a tiny piece of that 5 to 8%, so yes, it's an increase, and it's an increase at a time when we are a little sensitive to that.
Yeah.
But it's not dramatically changing. I mean, land, options, engineering costs on the private sector side are still the vast majority of that cost. So while noticeable, you know, and that's why we essentially want to move to a place where we're not updating fees once a decade.
Okay. Okay.
Because it's not great.
Well, that wasn't, at least for me, that wasn't very clear. Okay, that's a lot better, thanks.
So I have something to point out. I think you've got two classes or parties here. One is the people who are already here and those that want to develop something that will impact the people that are already here. And the question is, do the people who are already here have to pay for the incremental you know, to benefit those who want to add something to it? And so it depends on which way you look at this. But if you staff could explain this, there was that Supreme Court case that we went to when there was the development, right? So the point being that it's my understanding, if you could elaborate on it, but it's really core to where we've been for many years to make sure that those coming in pay the incremental impact. I mean, could you explain, am I right about saying that this is somewhat, in some ways, related to that?
There's a variety of cases. I'm trying to figure out which one you're focusing on. One case, a number of statutes state that you can't recover more than your actual cost of service. That is your ceiling. You're not required to recover that ceiling, but you recover less than that. The direction of practice that we've had here in Livermore that Mark mentioned was that we recover as much of that as possible. But you can't exceed that amount.
And the other piece to be clear on, the fees before you this evening are user fees, so generally processing, inspection, analysis fees. They are not essentially infrastructure fees, i.e. to build new roadways, water lines, and other things. Those are separate fees, charged separately. And again, there's case law and regulations.
And they're much bigger.
Those are much bigger, yes.
Right, but we went to the Supreme Court in order to make sure that we could recover, right?
That we actually could.
Right, so what I'm trying to say is, this is small potatoes compared to what we've fought for.
Councilor Coomber?
I honestly am taking very well to all the comments and agree with many of them. The one that sticks out to me is that we should be recovering more than 63% of the cost our staff goes through, especially with the regulatory environment within the state and federal governments now. And if we have to bear that burden, that something suffers there. So this way we can have these fees paid for closer to their actual cost.
I think one of the driving philosophies behind that was the concept of those who benefit pay. That if they receive a benefit from the city, then they pay to cover the city's costs. The question I've got is, how often do we revisit the amount of time that it takes to do these tasks? I know I've heard complaints from folks that said somebody comes out and does an inspection, and they're there for 5 minutes and leaves, and it's several $100s. One of the ones that kind of jumped out at me was the propane exchange rack. It's, $420. And I'm thinking to myself, how long does it take to inspect a propane exchange rack? So how often do we revisit the amount of time that it takes? From my own personal experience, I was looking at the compressed gases, and you've got the per unit cost close to $400. And I remember back in my lab, we had 12 gases hooked up to a manifold. And if that's in one room, but if you're charging $400 per tank in that room, you go into that room once, look at all the tanks. So I was having a hard time figuring out how you would calculate that per unit cost and how often we revisit that.
So the industry best practice is you should look at it every 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
And that would be one of the things I'd like to address in the policy.
Okay.
And set a regular time frame for taking and doing a comprehensive evaluation.
Okay.
One of the things you note is the mechanics of setting an average fee, which, I mean, there is an alternative to do that, and that is a pure time and materials program. So the first piece of that is, as you know, the actual inspection time, the time to literally be out there in the lab, is a very modest fraction of the overall. Obviously, you have to get somebody there, you have to get them back, you have to train them to a certain level. You'll have to keep record keeping of that. You have to have a system that follows up on all of those pieces of that to make sure that all of that record keeping is sent to where it needs to go. So all of those are also embedded in those fees. The other piece is, on some of them, an average fee by its very nature undercharges essentially the most complex that fall into that category and overcharges the least complex, but on average it fully recovers as is appropriate. The courts have said that that sort of methodology is appropriate as long as those classifications make logical sense and are defensible. So you are correct. It is possible in any of these cases to note where we're recovering a little bit less than we should or a little bit more than we should, but on average each of these classes do reflect. We do go ahead and then check basically staff hours against all the hours in the year and see if the math actually makes sense, so we aren't over-recovering that way. But you're right. On a case-by-case basis, we do like to look at the fees and then make sure that they're in the proper groupings, and then the second piece is to get the averages to be correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments at this point? Okay, I don't have any cards, so it doesn't appear that there's, I'll open the public hearing, and, Ms. Copps?
Thank you. I'll drop off a card.
If you hand it to Mr. Vin, please. On the
Okay, I just didn't write anything on it yet.
Okay,
I'll get it to you, I promise.
We can fill it out.
Yeah. So I'm concerned that that this could, be hard to monitor, just because, if other cities are recovering 20% and we're held at a higher standard, what is going to happen to some of the people that, maybe are on a fixed income? I'm not saying you don't deserve to recover this, but I think sometimes the taxes that we got from other arenas, such as the mall, were supposed to offset some of, our services. So I'm thinking if you do something like this, you really do need to start insisting that we can, if someone really wants to sit down and see where every dime goes in the city, they can. I think that, our firefighters and our police officers, and don't get me wrong, I just think they're wonderful. My great-grandfather was a firefighter, and I know how dangerous, these jobs are. But my daughter's boyfriend just became a police officer, so I really know, you deserve it. But then I just know that some of their, pensions are the highest, and sometimes people retire from these jobs making more money than they were, at the end of their career. So maybe it's a complex situation, and when you decide on what you're going to do with this, factor in the variables. Factor in where you are getting other tax revenues, because I think if other cities are doing 20, like you said, 60% is pretty good. And I don't think that we should run in a deficit, but I think there's, we really have to figure that a lot of people are on fixed incomes. We're an aging population, and we don't want to push people out of our town, do we? Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Copps. Okay, so close the public hearing. Any further discussion on the item? Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of 5.01.
Okay, moved by Vice Mayor Spadowski.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Carling. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstention? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next one up is the TEFRA hearing. This is the TEFRA hearing, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act. Ms. Reisner, good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Gosh.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Marchand and City Council members. Tonight, Council is asked to hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution approving the issuance of multifamily housing revenue bonds by the California Public Finance Authority in a principal amount not to exceed $55 million for the financing and construction of the 171-unit apartment development to be located at South Vasco Road and Brisa Street. As you may be aware, City Council held a public hearing to receive comments and approved issuance of the bonds for this project in September 2016. Nothing has changed about the project since that time. However, the developer, GEMCOR, experienced significant delays in securing investors for the tax credit financing portion component of the project. These investor-related delays were experienced by every developer using tax credit financing for construction of their projects over the last 12 months. As a result of using this financing, 20% of the units will be affordable to very low-income households earning up to 50% of the area median income. The Multifamily Housing Revenue Bond Program requires that the TEFRA, or Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act hearing, be held within 12 months of the project's close of escrow. The developer is now able to move forward and projects a close of escrow at the end of October. The TEFRA hearing is required by law, and there is no financial or ongoing compliance obligations for the city for this project. Housing revenue bonds are paid from the rental income generated by the project. Furthermore, approval of these bonds will not affect the city's credit rating or future ability to issue its own bonds. So staff recommends that the City Council hold the public TEFRA hearing, which you are, and to hear any comments that the public may have, and adopt a resolution to approve the issuance of the multifamily housing revenue bonds. And if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them. We might have a representative from the developer here as well.
Great, thank you. Questions for staff? This is one of those more obscure sorts of things. I never really understood why we actually vote, or why we actually have to have the hearing, but it's a requirement because the city is not on the hook. Our name appears on no legal documents on this. We're not responsible for any of the bond costs or proceeds, but we still have to hold the hearing because it's within our jurisdiction and our responsibilities. So, okay, so just so everybody's clear on that. So with that, there's no questions. I'm going to open the public hearing. No cards? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Coomber.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Werner. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, abstentions? It passes unanimously. Ms. Reisner, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, matters for consideration, 6.01, Asset Management Program Update for traffic signals, street lights, and traffic signs. Darren Greenwood and Anthony Smith stepping up to the plate here. Mr. Smith?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Anthony Smith, Maintenance Division Management Analyst, and of course with me is Darren Greenwood, our Public Works Director. Tonight we're here to give an update on the asset management program with respect to the traffic signals, streetlights, and signs. In the inventory of these assets, the city currently has 106 traffic signals valued at $42 million. And each one of these signals represents an actual signalized intersection, so all the equipment related to that intersection. The city owns and operates approximately 7,500 streetlights with a total valuation of $46 million, and approximately 12,500 signs with a complete valuation of $3.6 million. Currently, the city manages the traffic signals in a proactive manner, conducting monthly inspections to ensure that they're functioning properly, and then more in-depth inspections twice a year and once a year. On the streetlight side, responses are based primarily on resident contact and a twice-a-year staff inspection. So twice a year, staff actually go out during the night to make sure that streetlights are functioning. On the signs, city staff are also proactive, and we use a zone-based blanket replacement. So we split the city up into 12 different zones, and we replace all the signs in one of those zones every year. So that means every 12 years, all the signs would be replaced. For a prioritization method, we're recommending for the traffic signals that the very high consequence of failure rating go to the intersections that serve the highest volume of traffic. So in this case, it would be where arterials meet other arterials. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, the intersections that are signalized that have lower traffic volumes, represented by lower volume streets and the collectors and the residentials. On the streetlight side, the high consequence of failure rating would go to intersection safety lighting on arterials and collectors, and also enhanced pedestrian crosswalks. So anywhere that we have one of our rectangular rapid flashing beacons on an arterial, that would be in that very high category. And then we go down to the lowest usage, which would be non-intersection lighting on residential streets. This would essentially be the mid-block non-intersection lighting. On the sign side, staff are in the process of completing a transition to some new materials. So about 10 years ago, staff started making the sign facings out of vinyl instead of ink printing them, and they've resulted in a much longer life and better visibility. So staff will continue to monitor the signs to see if this replacement interval can be extended, but we do recommend a continuation of this zone-based blanket replacement program. This is also one method that we can stay in compliance with federal mandates for the reflectivity of these signs. So annualized costs projected for the traffic signals are $1.7 million per year. We're currently spending $1.1 million. Staff is keeping up, as you've probably seen, the traffic signals function. Staff is keeping up with the day-to-day operations of these. So that difference there between the two numbers would represent essentially the longer-lived pieces of the asset, so the poles and things like that that are going to have a much longer life that we should start putting money away to replace. On the streetlight side, the projected needs are approximately $1.3 million a year with a $505,000 current spending. I did want to note that this $505,000 is an update from the staff report. The staff report did not originally include the debt service that was paid for the last round of streetlight upgrades.
Yeah, because we replaced those about 3-4 years ago. I think
Correct. It was in 2012 and 2013.
Yeah, we replaced 7,000 streetlights.
Correct, yes. And then on the sign side, we are spending the recommended $230,000 per year on replacement of the signs. Some of the other asset classes that we've brought so far, we've included some different policy options. Unfortunately, with these assets, there's not a lot of good options out there. Staff will continue to seek out new materials, technologies, and methods to improve the service for these assets and to minimize the life cycle cost. So the next steps in the development of the program include completing the initial findings for the asset classes listed here, so landscape, parks, plazas, and trails, bridges and artwork, and then storm drains, waterways, curb, and gutter. And then the next big step then would be the prioritizing across the different asset classes. So staff's recommendation tonight is that we ask the council to approve the prioritization methodologies for the traffic signals, the streetlights, and the signs for further use in the development of the program. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Questions for staff at this point?
I have a question.
Oh, Councilmember Carling?
Why does this arise to the need for approval from council? I don't quite understand this, so help me out here.
So the overall program is a council directive to basically look at all of our asset classes, and the work program that we have for you is to divide those asset classes and group them into natural groupings and to bring them back for your analysis. This actually was the grouping that needed the least help from you. So rather than omit it from your overall analysis, we did want to show you that, yes, we actually have analyzed this one, and we don't have the normal options like have somebody else own it or run to fail, which is, on some of our asset classes, we brought those sorts of choices for you. So this is much more of an update than a request for a lot of specific direction on this one, and also to tell you that we are just 3 classes away from bringing you back the big item, which is to have you then start to give us priorities between the various classes. And of course, that's we're going to be incorporating all the direction that you have given us at the various times over the past 2 years, and then ask you to begin to give us direction between the various classes. So,
well, okay, so that's...
Sorry, we didn't have more work for you tonight.
No,
it's
I'm
much
not,
more of an update.
No, I was just...
At least we are not counting streetlights, okay?
But that explanation is fine, but if that's true and you want our approval, I guess I struggle with, in the traffic signs, you mentioned that you'll further prioritize, so you're saying trust us, we'll work on that later. And then there's another one that on streetlights, you say you'll prioritize in a similar manner, but I wasn't sure what that meant. And so I guess my point is that if you want us to approve, from my point of view, if you want us to approve something, I think it ought to be a little more complete. Now, I trust you guys are going to do the right thing, but, first of all, it seemed a little, from my way of thinking, it seemed a little silly that we as a council had to approve your prioritization of what you're going to fix, or, maintain. But secondly, if that's true, and Mark explained that it is, then I think it could have been a little more complete.
Okay. What is the annual debt service on the streetlights? It's kind of ballpark.
It's about $340,000 right now per year.
Okay, so most of that $500,000 is debt service.
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Councilmember Warner?
Yeah, we'll give you the help you didn't want, maybe, on this one. But there are a couple of policy questions here that I do think are important, and especially on streetlights. If you look in the package, you're talking 45 days to fix. And if you want a streetlight in your community, you kind of want the streetlight. So it's possible to fix those things within a few days if you want to. So, and the prioritization, it comes to mind that, in the wintertime, and we're getting darker earlier, it's more important than, say, later, maybe, to fix one of these things. So just because I know something about streetlights and communities kind of want their streetlights, I'm not sure that you've given them a high enough priority, actually. I just happen to know other communities get excited about their streetlights. So then the other thing that just struck me, I was surprised that we manufacture the signs. It's like, what? I mean, you would think that...
Never gotten a tour of the sign shop?
Pardon?
You've never gotten a tour of the sign shop?
No. Well, what I'm saying, I was just looking at this and thinking, you would think private enterprise would do that very efficiently. So I'm just surprised we do that. That's all.
Bless you.
And so the one item on that is that while the various base products we purchase all of those various base products, the actual creation and installation of the sign, we found has been slightly more efficient using the sign shop. We basically can size and install it essentially the way we need it to be done. If you'll remember, how we actually purchase things. If they are multiple things in multiple locations, you have to give very precise direction, sort of, to have all of that happen. You have to go through the contracting part of it, and that's on something as small as a sign. It doesn't work very well. On something as big as a traffic signal,
so
it works really well.
The whole process is efficient if we just kind of get it done, is what you're saying. Not just the manufacture itself.
It's actually getting the whole thing done, and it's the actual contracting, because each of these objects doesn't cost very much. And so it's much more efficient when we have very expensive objects to have the private sector do it, because then our overhead of inspection and making sure it meets the standards.
Okay.
Yeah, just again, thank you for the staff report and the work on the prioritization. Just as a reminder, we're doing this to pull our heads out of the sand in terms of what our overall city costs are and what the prioritization should be. I'd be willing, when we get the bigger picture, if you can, cost out what an accelerated street light replacement cost would look like, and then when we're seeing all of our other costs throughout the city, maybe that one starts to rise a little bit above others, because that's the I think the key deficiency. I was a little surprised to see a 45-day turnaround, but I know with some of the issues about parts and getting somebody up there to check it out, and it can take a little while. So yeah, I think we should just keep that in mind when we're looking at the overall picture. If it's a small cost which it probably won't be, whatever is these days, but depending on what that cost is, maybe we can knock down a few days off that replacement schedule. So
yeah, thanks for the guidance. Quick response on that. What we are looking at doing, that's where we're at with current staffing. Also note that most of our in-house staff, we're directing to the more important signals than the street lights. So what we're looking at right now is grouping the ones that were behind on the backlog of lights, getting outside contractor and getting those cleaned up. So again, we would start to generate a backlog with the people we have right now, but I think we may look at periodically just cleaning up that backlog or trying to keep it shorter. So with the additional guidance that 45 days is too long, we'll look at that.
Yeah, I think so. And the other principle you just mentioned there, you only buy so much budget deferral by creating a backlog, and then you grind, and then at some point you can't let your backlog grow infinitely, right? So you have to get it done. So it's much better to just don't have a backlog, and your cycle time will be a lot faster. So you're better to, every time one goes out, fix it.
Well, these are all LEDs, right? All these street lights, and weren't they supposed to last significantly longer?
12 to 15 years.
Yeah.
Yes. So
we replaced all the street lights. How come they're going out already?
So the trick is that the LEDs themselves are only one component of an entire system. And actually having the different components work well together and having all of the components work well, that has been the problem. So we've been working on warranty, we've been working with the manufacturers, we've been working over a period of time. So from that perspective, yeah, it's an outcome that we were surprised by and ultimately are working through, because you're right, the actual LED units themselves are supposed to last much longer. But unfortunately, it's a whole set of components that makes the streetlight work.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I have no public comment cards, so No hearing. These are matters for consideration anyway. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we adopt this policy subject to rethinking the streetlights.
Okay. Motion by Councilmember Warner. Seconded by
Second.
Councilmember Carling. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and now we are moving to next matters for consideration, the discussion and direction regarding revisions to the Livermore Municipal Code, Chapter 2.14 elections. All right, 2 cards.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jason Alcala, your city attorney. What I'd like to do is, this is a very complicated area of law, but I'd like to just offer an introduction and put this into context what we're discussing here today. Back in February, during matters initiated, the City Council requested a review of the city's elections ordinance and campaign contributions. Campaigns finance reform itself started in the early 1970s at the federal level and was followed quickly by the California State Legislature with the California Political Reform Act, which imposed campaign reporting. It also created the opportunity for cities to adopt local regulations for its campaigns. You're not required to, but you can. Livermore adopted its ordinance in 1986 and last revised it in 2004. Fundamentally, regulations with regard to campaigns infringe upon First Amendment protections, that being speech and the right of association. That is allowed in certain opportunities and is limited under limited circumstances. The city's ordinance right now complies with that. In certain areas we need some guidance and some clarification, and this is a robust and ever-evolving area of law. Now, after reviewing the ordinance, I identified 3 basic categories of improvements in areas we can adjust our campaign ordinance. The first is to revise campaign contribution limit regulations. There's a variety of things we can do there. There's a couple subsets I'll walk you through. Another one is to remove a requirement that candidates receive the prior approval expenditures before making expenditures on the candidate's behalf. The city attorney back in 2004 opined that that was an unconstitutional restriction. I'll go through why that is a bit later, but we're actually recommending that we formally remove that at this time. And the last one is to consider incorporating some recent legislative changes. With regard to the contribution limits themselves, there are 3 areas I would recommend that we provide some direction on. The first is to revise the language for consistency. In your agenda, in your staff report, you have a red line version of some existing language. I made the red line to just bring that up to speed, use consistent language in the ordinance itself. If you did nothing else, making those revisions or something close to that that's in the red line version would improve upon the ordinance we have now. Clarifying the term committee is an important area to address as well. Committee is used for 2 different areas of regulations in the ordinance, 1 for contribution limits and 2 for reporting. However, the standards of law for those differ considerably. And lastly, you can consider, I just noticed I got a second too, sorry about that. So your third item is considering changes to the contribution limits itself. And I'll go through what we've done is where we stand in relation to some of our neighbors and what your opportunities are there. With regard again to the revisions to the existing ordinance, to clean up the language, it's in the red lines. Inconsistent terminology, proposing to make that consistent. Inconsistent focus. Some of your regulations focus on the person making the contributions, or some are focusing on the candidate committee. Most ordinances to assist for enforcement, you focus on the person receiving the contribution rather than the person making the contribution, and some basic grammatical changes. And an example of that's contained in your staff report. With regard to the second area for contribution limits is to clarify the term committee. It's defined once, but it's being used, as I said, for both contribution limits and campaign filings. Also, it's unclear from the record whether the ordinance was intended to apply the contribution limits to all committees. I think I jumped it too far. There we go. Generally, there are 3 types of local committees. The first is a candidate control committee. The The next is an independent local election committee for our purposes. That can take two different forms. One is an independent expenditure and one is an independent contribution. The difference being an independent local election committee that is a contributor would be making contributions to a candidate. In that case, the law is clear that you can apply the contribution limits as they are today. Another area, though, is independent local election committees that make independent expenditures. That is, being expenditures in favor of a candidate or against a particular candidate. That's the area of law where we need to address a higher level of scrutiny that's been established by the U.S. Supreme Court. It's also known as strict scrutiny. With regard to the contribution limits, the city's regulations would only apply to city committees. It would not apply to, say, county general purpose committees or state general purpose committees or for anybody at the state or the federal level. This is solely for local. Those other ones, they can adopt their regulations or they would default to what the FPPC provides. Another one in here is a ballot measure committee, but that is expressly excluded in your ordinance already, even though it's within the definition. The later section excludes that, and there's a good reason why, because the state law is when you have an independent ballot measure committee, there's a less opportunity for the influence, a quid pro quo influence of someone putting money into an election and receiving a political favor. So the court has determined that the opportunity for corruption is far less in that situation, and therefore you cannot impose your contribution limits on a ballot measure committee. So your ordinance is strong in that area. By practice, the city has only applied contribution limits to candidates and candidate-controlled committees. What I'm asking for today is, if that's where the state of the law is where you want your regulations to be, I can clarify the law to do that, clarify your ordinances. Again, ballot measure committees are expressly excluded from contribution limits, and simply put, the state of the law in California was you can't impose contribution limits simply because measures cannot be traded for a vote. Getting to independent local election committees, they're arguably within the definition of the ordinance because it is broad and includes all committees, but the intent is not clear in your ordinance. When this matter was last brought before the council in 2004, the city attorney at that time said if you would like to consider that, we can, but additional findings need to be made because it will withstand the strict scrutiny review. There's nothing in the record so far to support that. Now, again, there's, as I mentioned, there's a variety of local election committees. There's contribution committees and expenditure. Again, expenditure committees make expenditures separate and apart from a candidate on behalf or against a particular candidate, whereas contribution committees make a direct contribution to a candidate. So what am I looking for today? I'm seeking direction on whether the ordinance should apply to local election committees and be subject to contribution limits. If the answer to that is there is interest in that, additional research needs to be conducted to see whether the facts support the regulation, so determination can be made by the City Council to impose those contribution limits on those committees. If not, if the absence of information in the record reflects the Council's intent that the ordinance was not intended to apply to independent local election committees, with that direction I can make those adjustments and bring it back to you. The third area for contribution limits is does the City Council want to maintain the existing $250 contribution limit? The amount can be increased by council. Going lower may be problematic. We have to make additional findings, but you have a baseline of $250 right now, which is consistent and supported by other case law. The City of San Jose had its ordinance tested, and in that demographic, they found $250 to be viable. Now, you can also increase that. Now, let's go to the next slide. So what do our neighboring jurisdictions do? So these are the limits, campaign contribution limits that are in our neighboring jurisdictions. Concord has 1,000. Danville, Pleasanton, San Ramon, Tracy have no limit. They have a variety of different regulatory schemes. There's no one-size-fits-all. It's based upon what you believe is important for your community, as well as setting the amount setting the contribution limit at an amount so candidates can mount an effective campaign. That's one of the things that the court will look to see, is that contribution so low that it precludes somebody from actually being able to participate as a candidate in a campaign. So that's the issues for contribution limits. Also, if the city council were to eliminate the contribution limits itself, get rid of the $250, that would answer the question relative to placing those limits on the particular committee. There would be no limits to place upon them. So that would moot the prior discussion I had. Moving on to the next category, again, the ordinance contains a requirement for a committee to obtain a candidate's approval for making an expenditure on the candidate's behalf. If that were to be implemented, that would actually run afoul and make that independent expenditure committee to require them to coordinate with the candidate and therefore change the nature of their committee. That's a fundamental change in their makeup. That's an unconstitutional requirement. It definitely infringes upon the free speech and right of association. The recommendation back in 2004 was to eliminate this particular item. We never received clear direction to do that. My request today is that we do obtain that direction. Now, the last category of the three is new legislation. There have been certain opportunities that have been presented by the state legislature since our last update in 2004. The first is electronic filing of campaign statements. What that does is right now candidates file their campaign statements. Those are their 410s, their 460s, identifying what type of committee they are, who they've received contributions from, and who they've made how they made their expenditures. For state campaigns, the candidates are required to file those electronically. Locally, it's an option. There is an opportunity to adopt that or give staff that direction to adopt that, which does a number of things. One, it makes it more efficient for the intake for the city clerk's office as the elections official, and two, it creates greater transparency. It makes those more immediately available to the public. Livermore does not currently do that, but the County of Alameda does, by way of example. Electronic candidate statements. That's a slightly different animal. Now, we all know when we have a election brochure that goes out, every candidate has the opportunity to put a candidate statement in that brochure. This is similar to that, but runs parallel. This would be in addition to what goes out in the voter pamphlet and the brochure, advising and introducing the candidate to the public and is translated into different language. Where it's parallels, this statement does not go into that brochure. This statement, however, gets posted on the city's website. So that would be an opportunity if the council want to create a separate opportunity for candidates to have another forum to reach out to the community and explain to them who they are. That could be done on the city's website. That would, unlike the first item, electronic filing for campaign statements, which would create a greater efficiency and result in a cost savings, at least that's our perspective right now. The electronic candidate statements, we don't have that in place, so that would require an additional cost to create that opportunity on the web page and administration costs with regard to the translation for that particular document. The last one is local campaign financing program. This is the most recent development. This is you've seen this at various, maybe have, various areas where if you agree to certain standards, the federal government or the county or the state will actually provide funding for someone to mount a campaign. This is a wide open area law. This has just been adopted. I'm not aware of any agency that's actually adopted this yet, but it gives you as the city council the opportunity to, one, create a fund bank to make it available to candidates if they were to run for an election. But two, you have to establish that administrative oversight for that, establish the rules for who would qualify and who would obtain that, and under what circumstances. That's a new area. It's unknown what those costs would be. It's not something we're recommending at this time, but I want to make sure that you are aware that it is available. Lastly, getting into the three areas and the three sub-areas for contribution regulations, we're seeking direction today. One, to update the language and make it consistent throughout the ordinance. Again, you have an example of what that might look like as an attachment to the staff report. Two, direction relative to committees. Is there an expectation or is there a desire that independent local election committees be subject to your contribution limits? If so, we need to go out and do additional research because that does not exist in the current record and it's unclear whether that was actually the original intent. If the direction is no, then we can come back and make that adjustment as well. Either adjust the term committee itself or create an exemption for local election committee, independent local committees, similar to what you've done for your ballot measure committees, to create an explicit exclusion. The third one is changes to contribution amounts. If there's any interest by the City Council to adjust those contribution amounts or to eliminate them, I can take that direction and return with the appropriate ordinance. Reduction in the contribution limit would require a significant amount of research as well to show that that did not negatively affect a campaign candidate's ability to mount an effective campaign. The second area, remove the requirement for candidate approval. Again, that's the area we identified back in 2004 that's unconstitutional. I recommend removing that from our current ordinance. And the last area we're seeking directions, is there any interest in pursuing either of those three, either the electronic campaign statement filings, creating that opportunity, secondarily, looking for electronic candidate statements, where they can actually put those on the city's website, and third, whether there's any interest in entertaining a local campaign financing program. Since that's the least fleshed out in the legislation, I would think that would take the most research just to bring back something to you with a recommendation. And again, I have not seen that implemented in the state right now. And this is a very complicated area of law, and it went rather quickly. The staff report is fairly comprehensive and goes much deeper a dive into this. So I'm available for any questions you may have, and I'll do my best to answer them. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions?
Are we going to take each one of these separately? Is that the way we need to do this?
You can. That's the way I structured it here with the whole slide, so you can walk through 1 through 3. Again, depends on where you go. Item C, if the contribution change the contribution limits were to eliminate those, that would answer the question for 1B.
Any questions? With the electronic candidate statements, could the city be reimbursed for the translation costs?
There are certain opportunities to do that.
Because right now the candidates on the printed candidate statement, the candidates pay for the translation costs. We reimburse the city, but with the electronic ones, upon whom does that responsibility fall?
We would place it back on the candidate. We would, if we get the direction to come back with that program for the electronic candidate statements, we would return with the policy that actually has that covered by the candidate themselves.
Now, the other thing is, from our perspective, it's required. Would it be required for the electronic statements? Because when we do the printed one, we are required to pay for the translation.
That is correct.
Would that also be required for the electronic version?
To the extent authorized by that statute, I would return to you with that requirement, yes.
Okay, all right.
Through your local program.
Okay, very good. Any questions? Councilmember Warner?
Well, I don't know if it's a question at this stage, but I mean, there's a lot of topics you've asked direction on. And I kind of like the suggestion we just go in order and go through it. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, let's just go down the list.
Got a couple of cards. So we have some.
So we have. Well, let's do it after the card.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. I just thought I'd get questions out of the way first.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Would it be possible under the local campaign finance program to limit it to people under 5'9" with the last name ending in ski?
I would not recommend that.
All right.
Okay. All right. I have two cards, Jean King and Paul Brown. Ms. King?
Good evening. Friends of Livermore Chair Lee Yonker is unable to attend this evening, but has given me his statement. Friends of Livermore contacted Steve Churchwell, partner of Churchwell White LLP, because he was referred to us as one of the best-known California attorneys who specialize in political and referendum law. He has served as the general counsel of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. The question we asked him was, can the City of Livermore limit the contributions from individuals to independent local election committees? Mr. Churchwell responded, and I quote, "The city may not limit contributions to a committee that only makes independent expenditures. The courts are clear on this point. If a political committee only makes independent expenditures, the government may not place contribution limits on the contributions it receives. That has been settled law for 7 years." Now that I'm not quoting him anymore. Mr. Churchwell details specific rulings, including those from the Ninth Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court, as well as the list of ordinances that have been struck down that limit contributions to independent expenditure committees that support or oppose local candidates. Mr. Churchwell then concluded, the rationale underlying all of these decisions goes all the way back to 1976. See Buckley versus Vallejo. The government may not place limits on independent expenditures. It is one of the simplest concepts in campaign financing. In the last city election, a union PAC made independent expenditures for candidates. It does not seem reasonable to limit contributions to independent local election committees if union and builder PACs would not be restricted. Mr. Churchwell states that, quote, the city could only regulate Livermore city committees. So a county or state committee, city committee of another city, or even a federal committee could avoid the city's contribution limit and place ads there supporting or opposing a candidate. I have Mr. Churchwell's complete comments if you would like them, and I would be glad to give you a copy. Another thought, in even-year national elections, incumbents have an advantage with voters who have not been following local issues. Local PACs provide valuable information about the record of incumbents. Finally, on a separate point, I want to address those who think Livermore's Friends of Livermore PAC is narrowly based. Quite the contrary. Unlike other local PACs in the last election, 147 persons contributed to it, many of whom also handed out flyers, made phone calls, wrote letters to the editor, and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Paul Brown? And then John Stein.
Okay. My name is Paul Brown, and I've been a resident of Livermore for 49 years. And during that time, I've actively supported candidates in many local elections. I remember years ago when the majority of our city council decided that campaign donation limits were in the best interest of Livermore. City councilmen like Don Miller and Archer Futch led the way with the support of many community leaders. These gentlemen and others were leaders in the moderate growth movement in town, and there was a lot of concern at the time about development interests putting big money into elections to advance candidates that supported their cause. I remember when the $100 donation limit was enacted. We now have a $250 limit per person, and we heard tonight about the possibility of increasing that. But such limits, I think, have become meaningless. Why? Because we had a PAC, a political action committee in town, that poured large amounts of money into the last city council election, allowing donations that greatly and effectively exceeded the $250 limit per person. This is wrong. You heard Kathy Streeter earlier in the open forum address this issue, and she talked about the amounts that were involved. PACs have become the thing on the national scene. From my perspective and the perspectives of many, there are good PACs and there are bad PACs. But I don't believe there is any PAC that is good for Livermore. You may agree with the priorities of the current PAC that we have, but rest assured that eventually another one will come along that you do not like. That said, I suggest that any revision in the city's election ordinance specifically put restrictions on the donations that get used for candidates through political action committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. John Stein?
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court. I agree with the previous speaker, but the real problem is that the political action committees support candidates based upon very specific goals. And when the candidate, for reasons of conscience, disagree, they just get a new candidate. For some people, it was the tightly drawn North Livermore development boundary. For others, it was the regional theater. For others, it was the downtown redevelopment. But there are two risks. One is that the PAC may not represent the best interests of the community, and the other is that it causes opportunity costs. I mean, we spent a lot of time arguing about things that in essence resulted in very little change. while neighboring communities have built sports parks, city farms, water parks, looks like a museum now, while we spend a lot of time arguing. The other argument that one of the previous speakers made is that incumbents have a large monetary benefit because of name recognition. I was not an incumbent. As Ms. Streeter spoke, they spent $35,000 opposing me, and I spent about less than $10,000 on my campaign. I urge you to level the playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Okay, that's it for the comment cards that I have. I'm going to close the comment period and bring it back to the council. Comments from the council?
Mr. Mayor, may I make one point of clarification?
Certainly.
One of the speakers got up and made reference to a settled body of law with regard to restrictions on the expenditures by independent expenditure committees. That's not the nature of Livermore's ordinance. Livermore doesn't regulate the expenditures by any candidate or committee. They regulate the contributions to a particular committee. That's the question. So that's an open area law right now, whether you can restrict the contributions that go into those committees. Now, again, I went through my presentation of whether these independent expenditure committees should be subject to those contribution limits, but they're not expenditure limits. They're limits on the contributions going to those committees. But again, it's unclear from the ordinance right now whether they're actually intended to be covered by this particular ordinance.
Now, we heard the comments from Mr. Churchwell that were cited that the city cannot limit the independent committees.
So let's be clear here. So there's two ways that a committee acts. One, it receives money, and two, it spends the money. Buckley versus Vallejo focused on the spending of money. So it says you cannot regulate what they spend. The open question is whether you can regulate the amount of contributions that go into a particular committee. There's case law in California under certain circumstances that can be done. It's an onerous standard. I'll make no bones about it. It's a very high, what's called the strict scrutiny standard of review. You have to do that independently. You have to go out and look at facts. That's why if the council were to introduce that, the job is not done tonight. We have to go out and do research. However, if that research has not been done to date, which raises the question, were those committees intended to be covered by those contribution limits, or was that definition drawn too broadly?
Yeah, based on your memo, the only place that successfully limited contributions in L.A., right?
L.A., I believe there was another one I referenced in my particular staff report, but the case law sets out that you cannot foreclose that opportunity if the facts actually support that large contributions have led to either the corruption or the appearance of corruption.
Right.
And that's a high threshold the council would have to sustain based upon facts if we're present, that the council could make that determination. That analysis has not yet been done.
And the key is an effective campaign.
So
Councilmember Warner?
So we're on this particular topic. So if I could, why don't we flip
with the first one?
Why don't we flip B and A and then go on it? Because we're on 1B, right? So do we want to go in order here? But with that reordering?
Go in order.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of questions, because on the direction on the committees, I think what you're asking is to go do some research, but I don't know exactly how much or what kind of work is involved. So if I could, how many potential independent local committees have been active in the, I guess we don't know if they're independent. I mean, we don't know if they're local or not, because there's some tests for that. But how many of these independent committees have been active in Livermore elections in the last couple of cycles? I mean, how many committees are we talking about having to look at?
There have been, excuse me, there have been between 1 and 3.
1 and 3?
In the last few elections.
Okay, so there's been between 1 and 3. So there's 3 that have been active over the last couple of cycles. So we're only talking about looking at 3. And what kind of things would you do, and how long would it take you to do this investigation?
Well, first off, if the council made the decision that they wanted to actually entertain and pursue the situation to see whether to make or apply the contribution limits to an independent expenditure committee, the research that would occur would be to review the different campaign filing statements, collecting those and gathering those, both local, county, and state, and seeing how many expenditures are made by these various committees within the city of Livermore. So that'd be the first analysis. And then with that, we bring that back to the council to see whether there was any undue influence from those large contributions. Were there, one, large contributions by those to those committees, and two, did that in the council's mind have a negative effect or the appearance of corruption or lead to corruption in an election? So those are the documents where we would start with.
So building off of that, you're mentioning, I mean, you've used the term corruption several times this evening. So basically, we would have to prove that there was corruption occurring as a result of those contributions, and that's a very high standard and something that's very hard to prove.
That was the standard that has been established by the U.S. Supreme Court in the decision that was mentioned earlier, Buckley versus Vallejo. So that would be the standard that needs to be overcome.
And then if you were to put restrictions, that would be on all independent expenditure committees within the city that are city-based?
It could only apply to city committees. It would not apply to county or state general purpose committees.
So somebody could then form a county committee and do the same thing, or a state committee, but they would have to have their expenditures go to a certain amount of state and county issues? Is that how they're defined?
The actual activity of determining whether somebody is a local committee, a county committee, or a state committee is based upon the expenditures. The first step is when a committee is formed, they self-identify. What type of committee are they? Are they local, county, state? That's the first step. The second step is how do they behave? What was their activities? If they identify themselves, say, as a county, but more than 31% of their money is spent at the state level, then they can become a state committee. So it's all about their behavior, and committees can change from the date they form and the date from election to election, from cycle to cycle. They may have to amend their filings as far as how they identify themselves based upon their activities.
So it doesn't stop a county or state committee from coming in and spending whatever they want? I mean, if we go through all the motions of identifying and defining the corruption and linking it to a particular group, that's only local. Somebody forms a county or a state committee, we have no jurisdiction over that.
Yes, so let's be a little bit clear here. So if a county committee were to be formed and would spend less than 31% of its money locally, they would still continue to be a county. So if you spent 70% of your expenditures within a particular jurisdiction, county, state, or local, then you'll be deemed a committee for that jurisdiction. So if you spent 69% of your expenditures, let's take the scenario. If you identified yourself as a Livermore Independent Expenditure Committee, you start there. But you spend only 69% of your expenditures within Livermore and 31% elsewhere, you're no longer a local Livermore election, and our local rules will not apply to you. So under those situations, I think that's what the question you're driving at. That's the answer to that.
Okay, and then also drilling down into corruption, I just want to make sure I'm getting the standards that we would have to prove that we understand it. Corruption would be specifically what? It would be proving that a person made a decision that they didn't want to make based on contributions. Is that pretty much what it is, or?
There's two ways that would present itself. Generally, corruption is a quid pro quo, making a contribution in exchange for political favor. That's the most obvious one. The other one is not voting a council member or candidate, not voting their conscience, which is they wanted to vote a particular way but chose to vote a different way. That's not something I'm going to be able to uncover based upon filings.
Okay.
Let's flip this the other way. You're talking about having a city committee spending 69% of the contributions. What if you had a committee that was listed as a county committee but spent all of their funds in Livermore, because Livermore is within the county?
If, in that scenario, if a committee is self-identified as a local county committee, however, made more than 70% of its 70% or more of its contributions in Livermore, they would be deemed by the FPPC, their rules and regulations, as a city committee. Okay. And they would have to readjust their forms and change their designation And that would be a very uncomfortable situation in the event that if there were contribution limits and they were subject to them, they could then run afoul. But right now, as it stands, we have not imposed these contribution limits on those type of committees, and that's where I'm seeking direction here today, whether to include those or to remove them. If they're included, we have to, if that's the desire of the council, additional research needs to be done. If they're excluded, it's a very easy exercise to go through and make an exemption like we did for the ballot measure committees.
Okay.
If we revise these standards, sort out what I'm trying to say here, as and it results in a Livermore Municipal Code issue that is contrary to what the FPPC may say, where's your enforcement?
So let me see if I can rephrase the question and answer. I think you're
That'd be
looking
good.
if we adopted an ordinance that someone disagreed with or thought was not supported by the law or the facts that presented to the council, who would be in the position to enforce that?
Yes.
It would not be the FPPC. The FPPC only enforces their rules. They're very clear that they do not enforce local election rules. The challenge I would anticipate would come from the outside, somebody, either an independent expenditure committee or the committee itself.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Warner?
Just listening to this is that, there is this request to level the playing field, but it doesn't look like there's any practical way to do it by imposing a limit on the local committees. And what you were explaining in answers to the other question, they'd have to be corrupt, and which means they don't have any ethics anyway, and there are many ways that all they have to do is dissolve themselves, and then they start over, right? So it's the new one. So there's various, they just can come and go, and so there's no effective way to regulate them. And I think the other question that Councilmember Coomer asked was, there really isn't any consequence that could be imposed by trying to level the playing field by keeping the limits on them to the level at which the practical other candidates can do. There's no effective way to do that by going through the work to find something, and which is even a high bar. But even if you did, and even if you impose these limits, then there's no teeth. There's nothing. There's really no way we can effectively put limits on even corrupt committees. That's what I'm hearing.
It's very difficult to enforce campaign regulations. If someone were engaged in actual corruption and that was actually documented, there are other laws that would allow the city, either the city, the district attorney, or the California Attorney General to address that. There's an independent body of law that deals with the actual graft and corruption, apart from contribution limits. So that activity, if ever were to be proven or established, could still be addressed, but it would not be through this ordinance.
Okay, so this ordinance couldn't really do anything that isn't already doable, and it would be a lot of trouble, is what I'm hearing.
That's one perspective, yes.
Okay. However, I think we get to the only viable option then is C. And it may be just symbolic, because even if you went to these PACs don't have any contribution limit, right? And there's clearly people are spending hundreds of time, or contributing hundreds the amount that any particular times the amount a particular candidate's limit is. So we could go to no limit like our surrounding cities, but I don't think that it just symbolically levels the playing field. There would have to be another group of citizens with a lot of money to throw around to actually equal what we have, is what I'm hearing. But we could, so we could respond to Mr. Stein's request, but I think it's only would be symbolic, and I don't think there's any harm. So I guess where I'm going to jump, go to the chase, and that is just say I think we ought to just forget this thing on the committees and just put no contribution limit in. I mean, that's where I am.
Councilmember Carling?
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about the contribution limits to specific campaigns, but because I haven't quite reached a conclusion there yet. But I do agree that with Councilmember Warner about it's a pretty large hill to climb from my point of view, having read the report and actually spending some time talking to Mr. Arcala separately about all of this. That I don't see any practical way of setting campaign limits for committees. I just don't. I mean, I appreciate the point made by Mr. Brown and Mr. Stein about leveling the playing field, but based on case law and other cities that have tried to limit it in the state, it's just not getting anywhere. And so I'm with Councilmember Warner on that. I'd still like to have some more discussion about individual contribution amounts. But maybe we can take these in order like we first decided. Well, I know, but I mean, in some respects that's true, but I also think that we can separately decide on each of these. So.
Okay.
If I can continue to go down that rabbit hole.
You can go
So we can start with the updating
far as
the
you
language
want.
and then work our way down there. So,
Well, I think updating the language is,
It's fine.
yeah, it's
Okay.
housekeeping. It makes our attorney happy because now he has some clarity. I think we're good with that.
So to help move this on, is there 5 heads or 3 heads? Gotcha, okay.
5 bobbleheads. But, the C does affect B. So if we do something to C.
It doesn't have to.
Depending on what we do with C.
Why?
Well, the logic train.
I know, your point was only that it's symbolic. That's what you said. And so my point is that it doesn't follow. It doesn't have to follow. I mean, right now, we have a contribution limit of $250 on C, whereas there's no contribution limit on B.
Right, and if we eliminate the contribution limit on C, then B doesn't matter, because B
Well, fair enough, but I'm
states who has
I'm
the
just-
contribution limit. So if there's no contribution
Well,
limit,
okay,
B.
but the word was symbolic by making it
Well, I think I would
infinite.
argue that it's a little bit more than symbolic, and that's what I was going to say. But if we want to go through B first, then I'll say my comments on C. But
I'd like to decide B first.
well, I
But then you
think,
need
I
to
think the
talk
point
about
being
C.
symbolic was that, yes, you would remove all the limits, but on the other hand, it was whether you could practically achieve.
No, I agree with that. My
level.
point
So I
was
think that's-
that-
I think that was a symbolic point.
Well, no, I agree with the symbolism. I disagree with Vice Mayor's point that one follows the other. That's what I disagreed with.
Okay.
okay. Well, the decision of one would follow the other, but anyway.
Well,
in
of
some
course,
people's
we
minds,
said we were
maybe
going to
not
take an
others,
ABC, right?
I may have put these in the wrong order for your presentation here, from what I'm hearing. But to the extent, if the contribution limits were eliminated entirely, that would answer the question for B. If the contribution limit remains, then yes, you still have to answer question B.
But you're saying that to limit the contributions to committees would be problematic and require significant additional
Additional work.
research.
Correct.
It may not get us there anyway.
So to clarify why the elimination of the contribution limit amounts, because the direction with regard to committees, whether to apply contribution limits to them, if the city doesn't have any contribution limits, then there's nothing to apply to the candidates, the candidate control committees, or the independent expenditure committees.
Huh.
That's why they're linked.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So if I can.
Certainly.
Just
I was
expand
thrown
on
by
the point.
symbolic.
One of the reasons why I brought this up is because Mr. Stein brought it up as during public comment at a meeting after the election, and it really did, it began my thought process of, how do we allow the candidates to have some control over their messages? And I'm not trying to criticize anybody, but it is rather difficult when you do have a contribution limit of $250. I think I was going through the last several campaigns. I think nobody raised more than $10,000. And for those of you who aren't a local government geek and who have never run for office, those two-color mailers that you get in the mail. For one mailer, it's approximately $15,000 to hit the entire city of Livermore. So no candidate in the recent elections have been able to generate enough money to produce one mailer, let alone all the other costs that are associated with a campaign. So I believe that lifting the limit, while some may say that it's symbolic, I would argue that it would also give the candidate the ability to control their message a little bit in a more effective manner if you're able to raise more money. It's just campaigns are getting more and more expensive. If we're restricting ourselves, it just leaves it open for other outside influences to come in and control the message. So that's why I would lean towards lifting the limit. It would give you a chance of raising enough money for at least possibly one mailer and some other items that you would need to run an effective campaign, let alone campaign signs and all the other costs. So that's why I was leaning towards it. I know it doesn't, for some people, that wouldn't completely level the playing field, but I think it would make it easier for the candidate to get their message out.
I wasn't proposing that we keep it at 250. I just didn't understand. I just wanted some discussion about whether it should be infinite or some other number like 500 or 1,000. That was where I was headed.
Then I think it starts getting a little complicated. How do you come to those numbers?
I have no idea.
Right, and that's why you look at the other cities, and there's a bit of history behind campaign limits in other cities. If you ask Dublin council members, why is there a $500 limit? They actually jokingly refer to it as after one of the candidates' last names. It's the Smith rule, because he came into town and just raised a ton of money, so they passed contribution limits because he was able to generate so much money. I don't know Walnut Creek. That's a very interesting one at $100. But I think in general, it's just very difficult to quantify or qualify some kind of contribution limit number, and then you have to take into account the cost of inflation.
Well, again, I'm not opposed. Yeah. I'm not suggesting we keep it at 250, but the analysis was done some time ago and came up with 250. So,
what was that analysis?
I have no idea, but
there was.
I know that, but there was an analysis done. I'm saying, but
is that an analysis, or is
but
it
to say there was no analysis isn't right. And you could argue whether it was a good analysis or not, but the fact is that 250 was decided some years ago through some sort of process, right? Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct.
The council decided, well, $100 isn't enough, so let's.
Well, okay, but that's why I wanted this discussion.
It was a fairly random.
Okay, fine.
But
okay.
The thing is that now, I know Pleasanton has a limit.
Has no limit.
Thank you. I may actually have something important to say. I know Pleasanton has a limit of $1 per registered voter. That's the candidates can sign on to a voluntary limit of expenditures, and I believe it's like $42,000, as I understood, is the candidates can voluntarily restrict their expenditures, but that doesn't address a political action committee. Political action committees can still spend an unlimited amount of money, but the other interesting thing is if you wanted to have a fundraiser, you run afoul of this concept of an in-kind contribution. So say you wanted to have a fundraiser at a facility, well, the facility can't donate their facility to the candidate because it's greater than the $250. So you would have to spend the contributions that you get on the facility because we're bound by the in-kind contribution. So there again, you put more and more obstructions between the candidate and getting his message out, as the vice mayor pointed out. So we're on C.
What did we decide about B?
Well, I think we decided if we pull the limits on C, then B solves itself.
Okay, fine. Okay, I'm okay with C. If everybody thinks that it ought to be infinite, then that's okay. I mean, I don't have any objection.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I would.
Well, whatever. Okay.
I think some candidate would like to get infinite dollars, so I don't. I'm not worried about that coming to pass.
So if I'm following the conversation right now, I think we're coalescing around a decision that, with regard to the contribution amount in the existing ordinance, to eliminate that. And if that is the pleasure of the council, that would eliminate the need to give further direction on the committees. We'll make some cleanup language, but that would, the question of whether they're subject to or not contribution limits has been answered if there are no contribution limits. Is that the pleasure of the council?
Yep.
One question related to that. We're still retaining the $50 anonymous donation. Is that correct? Is that in the...
I had not proposed to eliminate that, or to adjust that, but if that's the council's desire, we can continue to keep that.
And that's, I think it was 2 contributions per reporting period of $50, or it's not unlimited $50 anonymous donations.
So you have that there again, then that brings back the question of whether that requirement only applies to your candidate and candidate control committees, or you want to have that applied to your independent expenditure.
Nice.
Oh, did I gum up the works
Yes.
even further?
You happy now?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we are retaining that, because I think all contributions should be reported.
Okay. So we can require the reporting. The issue is you cannot, if you do not include independent expenditure committees within the definition of, well, within the scope of your local election commissions. The only people that will be subject to that are your candidates and your candidate control committees. So with that would continue to stay in the status quo. If you wanted to, again, extend that to an independent expenditure committee, you would have to put that upon them.
And then
It's what's
also,
the secondary analysis.
there's, I think one of the reasons, one of the points of analysis in the $250 limit, there are state requirements for contributions above $250
That is correct.
in terms of your items before the council.
That is correct.
So could you explain those?
So right now, in the California Political Reform Act, campaign contributions of $250 or less are not seen to be a disqualifying interest if that person who made a contribution were an applicant before the city. If it's $251 or more, that individual makes it to a particular candidate who becomes a council member, that council member would have to recuse themselves from participating in a decision affecting that contributor.
So somebody engages in a competitive bid process, or not competitive bid, but maybe an RFP that goes out and the council must decide on the candidate. Anybody contributing to that candidate above 250, that candidate would then need to recuse themselves from that decision.
That is correct.
For what period of time?
It's a 1 year from contribution.
1 year from contribution. So that's an important wrinkle.
It is.
So what that does is give the people who form the PACs the advantage, because they don't have to recuse themselves, right? If the money goes into one of these independent PACs, so somebody who wants to influence results would put it into the PAC rather than directly to the candidate.
So influence is not a corrupting factor considered by the courts. But those individuals, if you made a contribution to a candidate over 250, that particular candidate, if that's a council member, could not participate in that decision. If, however, it were the PAC making it independently and money did not flow to the council member, they would not be recused.
Right, that's what that's a more precise way of saying what I was alluding to. And the point is that there isn't really that much, because of what Vice Mayor Spadowski brought up, the downside danger is lessened by having a no limit on the candidate-controlled committee, because then there are further restrictions on the behavior, whereas there are none on the PAC side.
Now, there are additional regulations through the FPPC that govern how the contributor must be identified in their reports. I have not researched those in depth, but if that's an interest for the council with regard to this $50 anonymous, I can further research that and see whether that has any additional effect on there, or what the state regulations have to say about that.
Yeah, because and then there's different reporting requirements for donations above 1,000, is it? That you have to report it within 24 hours?
There are different contribution limits at the state level with regard to major and minor committees and major and minor contributions.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that we have different reporting requirements and recusals now. It's something that we haven't had to deal with before. But if you do have an applicant or somebody coming before the council, that it's a decision that we have to make sure that we recuse ourselves. So.
So that's not an administrative burden that the city has or you have as candidates and council members right now, but it would be something you'd have to watch going forward if you were to make that decision. So again, to see if I captured the pleasure of the council right now, for 1A, to update the language, for 1C, to eliminate the contribution limit amounts, understanding that would also answer the question for B. Very good. Thank you. The second one is removal of the requirement for a candidate to obtain, for an independent expenditure committee to obtain the candidate's approval before making the expenditure on their behalf. That would not be supported by the law. That changes the nature of the independent expenditure committee. My recommendation is we eliminate that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm seeing 3, 4 heads. Okay, we've got direction on that one. The last one is, what do you want, if there's any interest in the council to adopt any of the new legislative opportunities? First one being creating the opportunity for electronic campaign statement filing. Rather than filing in paper, file those electronically. The city clerk has expressed an interest in doing that and make it more efficient for our particular department.
Sure.
And we're talking about 24-hour requirements to
I think we
filing.
got 5 heads.
Yeah.
Good.
The next one is with regard to electronic candidate statements. Again, this is not what goes in the actual flyer or the voter pamphlet, but rather be something that would live on the city's website. That would require, we have not analyzed that. If you were to give direction to pursue that, we'd come back with a report explaining what that looks like and the potential costs that would go along with that, including
Yeah,
the
I'd like to
question.
see the cost. It sounds like a good idea, but it also, I think it'd be good to know what the burden is before making a final decision.
The questions that I have about that is, do we want to keep the official city website separate from the local election and the politics? I just don't know how that, I don't know if there's any issues behind that. I'm thinking not technical, but in terms of having an official city-run website hosting candidate information, even if you pay for it. I don't know if that's really a burden that we should be putting on the city or not.
And there are a lot of guidance we can look to what the state has done with that.
Yeah.
We look at the ballot, whose name goes first on the ballot. There's special rules as far as how you draw them in the lottery to figure out who goes first and second. That experience would be visited upon the city.
Okay.
So those are the items we would address for you and bring forward with a recommendation. At this point, it is new. Again, I have not seen any local cities. I didn't check Berkeley. I probably should have checked Berkeley to see if they had done that. But if there's interest, what I could do is bring back some more information about that particular item when I return with the update to the ordinance itself.
I think the Vice Mayor's got a good point there, so that's one that we need to think more deeply about.
Yep.
Well, on the other hand, we already post all of the the campaign finance documents on the city website.
That's kind of different.
And I think with the
It's still
electronic
part,
filings,
it's related to the campaign.
that'll be through that. Anyway.
That's kind of like public information. The order that it appears when you scroll through and all of that. I mean,
Well, on the other hand, there is the Smart Voter, so maybe we just have a link to the Smart Voter website.
we don't have to solve it
Yeah.
now, but
I would like
we got
to get
think
more
about
information, but yeah.
Let's just think about this one.
Right.
So very good. So I can bring back some more information. Would you like that as an update to the council, or just at a council meeting, or just me to give you a city attorney memorandum? And if you feel inclined to pursue that, any one of you can bring up during matters initiated and put back in a future agenda.
That sounds.
Yeah, that sounds
Can I do
fine.
that? And the last one's with regard to a local campaign financing program. Again, this is very cutting edge. This is brand new. Mayor Marchand, you made reference to a similar program, which is Pleasanton. It says if you can voluntarily restrict yourself. That's one thing you can do with this, which is if you want to place a restriction on receiving campaign financing from the city, you then can put limits on contributions they can receive and the expenditures they can make. But again, this is a program that has to be built from the ground up by the city. You see how complicated this area of law is. I don't recommend going here, but I wanted to highlight this opportunity if you were interested in pursuing it, and if so, I'd bring back additional information.
I mean, you're suggesting taking money from the general fund, setting it aside for elections.
That's where it would come from.
I think this is a bad idea.
I think that there's certain qualifications that a candidate needs to have, and I think one of those is having the wherewithal to mount a campaign.
How would you decide that?
Pardon me?
How would you decide that?
Oh, no, I'm saying, but going through an election process, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
I'm agreeing with you. So that's okay. No.
Sorry.
No, but I'm saying, but you need to have some sort of wherewithal that you've got a certain critical mass to have real recognition, have a campaign, to get people out there. I'm not in favor of having a city-run campaign system. No, I'm agreeing with you.
Unless you're willing to entertain the last name ends in ski thing. I don't know.
We already decided that.
No, my last name ends in D.
I'd see Werner ski and Marchand ski.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay.
I think with
it's only
that, I received
9:30.
the direction I was soliciting here tonight. This is a very complicated area. Obviously, we haven't touched this as a city council or as a city since 2004. I think with these changes, I'll bring them back in ordinance for your consideration with this direction. I'll get you a memorandum. If you feel so inclined, you can place it on a future agenda during matters initiated if you want to pursue the electronic candidate statements. With that, I'll bring back an ordinance hopefully sometime in November. And at that point, if it's introduced and adopted by the city council, we may not need to revisit this for another decade.
If I could just to clarify, on page 378, since we're cleaning up some of the language, it says you can only accept contributions during an election period.
Yes.
Just to define what election period is.
That is actually defined in your ordinance already.
Okay.
I don't recall how many days after the last election. That's already established. It's so many days after your last election through the next election. So
Yeah, the first thing I thought of was it would be the filing date, whatever the date is in August, the filing date to the date of the election. In my mind, that would be the election period, but obviously it's not.
No, it's already established in your ordinance. If you want to review that, I can bring that back to you through a separate action, but that's already established in your ordinance. That's so many days after your last election, so that your election cycle for 2018 commenced roughly towards the end of 2016.
Or just say election period, which is so many days after the previous election.
That's where it is right now. So right now, it's a short period of time. It's like 50 or 60 days.
But that way I don't have to go back and look. Okay, it's all good.
So that'll be in the ordinance when I bring it back. So if you want further adjustments, you can tell me at that time.
Okay, all right, very good.
Thank you for your indulgence. This is a complicated matter, and you did a great job.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for being prepared. What is it, 4 meetings in a row? Close to it?
Yeah, we finally got
Oh, we
there.
had a bridesmaid.
Finally, Lucy didn't pull the football from you. You got to kick it.
All right. Okay. Being no further business, matters initiated. Councilmember Warner.
Okay.
Start on that end for a change.
What is the report out? So I went to 3 meetings. One was Livermore Downtown Inc. Board of Directors, and one of the interesting items on the agenda was a presentation by David Eichler of Legacy Partners for what's going to happen on the what they're proposing for the Growth Brothers site. And at this point, there's some publicly available documents. So for that, is that true?
Yes, they've submitted an application, and we do have documents on file.
Right. So I would just like to suggest to anyone to go look at that, but in particular those that are going to participate in the outreach process, to just take a look at what's going to happen across the street from the downtown core that we're talking about in terms of the residential proposal for the rental flats as well as the retail on First Street. So I think that's worth looking at. I went to a LAVMA board meeting, and I would just say that's the normal business. I don't think there was anything outstanding at that point. And the mayor was also there. That was on August 31st. And then September 6th went to the Livermore Cultural Arts Council, a monthly meeting, and the thing of interest there was the LCAC voted to involve itself in the study of the economic benefits of the arts to the community. So they'll participate in that study, and there are various organizations that are going to contribute to the cost of that. So I have 2 matters initiated, if I may. One is no surprise. And I mentioned the last time, because there wasn't even matters initiated, that I was going to initiate it. And basically it's I'm asking for approval for the staff to enter into substantive discussions with the Stockmen's Association, Interfaith Housing, and kind of scope out what we're talking about. I mean, it has a lot of potential benefits in terms of, we've heard, building affordable housing. Now the thought is maybe up to 100 units. It can offset a portion of the $14 million obligation on the core. assure that the downtown plan will include ample green space to actively be enjoyed by all, recognize the significant contribution of the Livermore Stockman's Rodeo Association to our community, celebrate our rich Western heritage, and honor our veterans. So it's just kind of hitting on all things. But I want to point out there are many details to work out, and it's not going to be simple. And that I think some of the key points are that an appropriately sized park and configured appropriately as well. There'll be naming, there'll be the memorial, and there'll be some other features. And I think we have to be very careful as to how we craft this deal and work with everybody. And it's going to take some time. But my request, and I would like to know if staff believes this is possible, is that I think it will be a significant factor in our deliberations when the time comes back and we hear the community outreach, and that we should have some kind of sense of this in the same time frame that we're going to be making decisions with respect to the downtown. So I would request that there would be, and get guidance from you, that do an initial scoping, come back and get further direction from us. I mean, maybe that's the best way to do it, and that then we go from there, and that we don't need to talk one way or another here as to what we feel about this. But I would suggest that you do enough work so that we really know what we're talking about, so then we can have a conversation, and then I think it'll take a couple of steps to get through there. So that's my request, is that we authorize them to begin discussions with the various parties to see what we're really talking about.
So there's one piece which is very doable and one piece which is slightly problematic. So the discussion with the Stockmans is very possible. They hold the equivalent of a deed restriction on our site here, and that is, we're actually asking them to enter in negotiations with us to see are there conditions under which those would be revised or released. The second is who might be a partner to accomplish something. That's a second step, and we can't pre-choose that partner as there. But essentially, I understand at least Councilmember Warner's direction would be to essentially explore under what conditions would the Stockmans be willing to essentially adjust the rules that they placed on us as the property owner here for this 33-acre site. And then we could come back to you with that information. You could give us further direction.
So we have some heads nodding on that?
We'll just get some rails around.
Right. The way that I'm trying to clarify it in my own mind, do what you need to do in order to bring it back to us so we can hear this idea in front of the council. That's
very good.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't want, I'm not trying to give, I don't want to give detailed direction without us first hearing it as a collective group to say start. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but start negotiating. Let's do this and X, Y, and Z for that here and that. No. Just whatever you need to do, bring it back to us so we can discuss it as a group.
The way I phrased it was scope this out. I mean, there's several parameters that some of which I mentioned, some that I have no clue about, and so we kind of got to know what kind of animal are we talking about here, and then we'll have a.
So your matters initiated would result in this returning to you this fall with further information for your consideration.
That's right, and I'm just trying to be cognizant of the timeliness. Now, if I may say this, there is the other thing I would ask you to pursue is that you alluded to, it may be problematic, but there is reason to think about an exclusive deal and just kind of check that out too, right? So you got that? Because I think there's there might be some there might be an agreement in the works actually. So
right, and we would bring back information on essentially the constraints on that and the process to go through the whole
thing. So there's a so that's one request for you to kind of work with those entities to kind of inject in a timely basis, some very important information for our downtown. There's a second request that I would like you to reach out to the existing business owners, property owners on First Street and further on over on the east side, and find out if they are interested in possibly buying, 20 feet plus or minus, say 10 to 20 feet extra property between their buildings and what the city currently owns. And the reason that I'm suggesting we reach out to those property owners as a special group is right now, if you go through, you walk around there, it's the backside of all these businesses is not particularly appealing. There's they're full, overflowing dumpsters. It's just kind of a jagged property line. But I've talked on occasion now to 3 different owners, and they're all very interested in buying additional land. And the advantages are the ability for them to permanently think about how to fix it. And so again, just find out if they're interested in buying it. But there would be obviously conditions on this that if they did buy it, that they would have to, make it look nice through there. But just, I'm suggesting if we get approval is just reach out and see if there's interest in what they would do with an extra bit of land. So is that, just find out what's there, and that's a group that could also inform some of our decision making.
So the part of the answer there is we could certainly see if there was any interest by the property owners. Disposing of public property to adjacent property owners is very specific constraints around it. So what I heard there was a request to actually see whether there was any interest. The actual accomplishing that interest is a pretty complicated item, which we can bring information back as well.
Right.
But that's a 2-part process. Your very first question is, would anybody be interested? And generally there are requirements like fair market value. There are competition-related issues in there, so it is a little bit complicated. But at least as far as staff understands, the request is to at least poll the property, to see if I understand this, to poll the property owners immediately adjacent to the city-owned properties there to see whether there is interest in them acquiring some modest amount of property immediately adjacent to their areas.
I didn't think it was simple, but it's doable if it's compelling, right? That's the point. Just find out if there's interest. But what I'm saying is, having had casual conversations with several, they're all interested. So let's just formally have it with everybody and see what's really there.
And the question there is there support for staff to at least ask the question of the adjacent property?
Right, just ask the question, find out if there's interest.
I would, as long as we get the information regarding the process, a quick staff update. It doesn't have to be a staff report, but some kind of update as to what the process would look like to dispose of public property, because I've been through a few of those, and it's a little complicated, but I mean, you can poll them if they're interested, but then if they see the process and realize the price that they'd have to pay, I don't know. I don't know if we have enough. Anyway, I guess it's fine, but I'm just saying that without knowing the process and the cost. I mean, you can informally poll people, but then when the costs and the steps are in play, it might not be as attractive. So I don't know what the purpose of polling them before we know all the information.
Well, you're just turning it into an impossible catch-22.
Well,
just find out if they're interested, because I'm saying I've talked with 3. Nobody's going to think they're going to get any kind of deal. It would be obviously fair market value and that kind of stuff. So, and you got to competitively bid and go through all of that and do it properly. But the idea is that it really looks bad now. These people's livelihood depends on that looking good, and I just believe that we should ask them, as we're getting input from everybody, what they think and what they would do. It's a valuable piece of information that I think would inform our deliberations.
Is there consensus around that request?
Works for me.
I got 4.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty.
That's it? Okay. Councilmember Coomber.
All right, since we've
Vice Mayor always goes last.
Since we've last met, I only did a couple of things. The first was last week of August, I should say, the LAFTA Finance and Administration meeting, we got together as a subcommittee to get an update from the budget and a couple of legislative items, which are now settled, I think, AB 758 and 1444. I think 1444 is settled. 758 has to do with the getting the authority to build a rail line without BART stepping in, if I remember that correctly.
Whatever that turns out to be.
And there's a story for another day completely there too. We just went through a couple of items, mostly having to do with budget and expenditures and orders of new buses. Thursday, the 21st of August, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the city, but the movie Four Wheel Bob showed at the Vine. If you were able to go and see it, it was a crazy old guy in a wheelchair climbing around the Sierras at 11,000 feet, and just how we do that kind of thing. But we had a great night. It was a fundraiser for Sunflower Hill, our good friends, and we pretty much sold the place out. It worked out very nicely for Sunflower Hill, so hopefully we'll meet with them later this week. Today we started the day at 6:45 this morning at Station 6. I was out there for a 9/11 observance early on. It was very touching. We had many, many people, probably a few dozen people from the neighborhood come out and observe this very somber occasion today that we just can't afford to let drop off the radar every year. And went very well, and our appreciation to LPFD and all they did to make this happen today.
Councilor McCarley?
Yeah, so since the last time we met, I didn't have any formal committee meetings. Some of those meetings were canceled or are not held in August, much like city council meetings here aren't usually held in August. But I did represent the city in a number of different things. Seemingly, John and I were showing up many of these places together. So, well, the top business breakfast reception was nicely done, and recognizing some of the fine businesses that we have in town. It was really quite impressive. We had breakfast with Eric Swalwell, the Tri-Valley Mayor Summit, the 99-cent store grand opening where they gave away a number of fancy TVs for 99 cents.
32-inch flat screen and a George Foreman grill.
Right. John and Councilmember Coomer and I participated or attended the Livermore Police Department swearing in. That was a very nice ceremony. There was the Livermore Valley Business Awards summer luncheon at Concannon. John and I, again, were judges for the Taste of Livermore yesterday.
That's great fun.
It was great fun, but it was hot and heck out there. Anyway, and then...
That beer was really good at Bauman's, let me tell you.
Yeah. And again, John and I were at the fire station number 9 this morning for the 9/11 memorial recognition. I do have one matters initiated, and that's around parking. We've had some discussions over the course of many months with regard to the downtown development and new parking structures and so on and so forth. But I'd like, and I think the city is actually, some of the staff has actually begun to look at this, but to do a more formal analysis or options for wayfinding for people, and I'm not sure that's the right terminology, for open parking spaces. And what that, I know that we've on and off people have talked about making deals with some of the, say, the banks, for example, when they're not open. Can people park there, or even the number of empty spaces that are available at the parking garage? And I think, I frankly have never had a problem finding a place to park. But, for people that are coming from out of town, I think it would be a great help if we had some signage or something then that would direct people to where they might effectively and efficiently find a place to park. So if you guys, I know that you've been doing some of that, but if you could do it more formally and bring back some thoughts, options, that would be appreciated.
Do you mind if I add to that?
Depends.
So we.
You're gonna again, if your
I think we
name
should
ends
do
in SK.
B first.
No,
and
wait a
then
minute.
C.
I thought you were gonna ask for a reserve
Spots for skis, no.
Yeah.
But we did, we had the Nelson Nygaard parking study, so it would be great to wrap that up
Oh, okay,
into this
fine.
analysis and let us know what has been implemented from that study and then what's left over and why we haven't implemented it. Probably, I'm guessing, cost. But yeah, an update on the Nelson Nygaard parking study. I think it would be timely with what we're doing with downtown as well.
Yeah.
So we
Good.
had a lot of that pretty.
So what has been implemented, what would be next steps, and what the costs of those next steps might be
Yeah,
to
yeah,
accomplish some of
yeah.
these things? Because you are correct, it's resources, so one of the things would be to bring that back as an item for you to
Please, yeah.
consider and say, okay, yes, we want to spend this money to do these things.
Yep.
Very good.
Thank you.
I'm good.
That's it? Okay. Vice Mayor Spadowski.
So it would have been nice to go see Four Wheel Bob, but somebody scheduled it on back to school night. So I'm glad Sunflower Hill received some money from me for a donation there. But joking aside, the only meetings I've had this month, again, everything's pretty dark, except for Wheels. We seem to roll forward with Wheels no matter what. Had several AFTA meetings, and again, Councilmember Coomer outlined a lot of what's going on with LAFTA. But what I would like to mention is that we did receive a presentation at LAFTA today on the BART EIR, and I was wondering when we will be receiving a presentation at the council about the BART EIR, and also what's the process for our comments. I think we really need to look at this as a council and review the comments and making sure that we're coordinating with other Tri-Valley cities, the Alameda San Joaquin County Regional Rail Working Group, and other entities. So this is a big deal. And what I saw today in the EIR presentation at LAFTA is really concerning. So, Mr. Stein's laughing for people that can't see that on TV. That was part of my reaction to some of the presentation. So I look forward to sharing that with everybody else at this
October 9th.
October 9th meeting.
Both of those items would basically come before you, which would mean a presentation from BART and a draft letter on the EIR for your consideration and direction upon.
Yeah, because anyway, I'll save it for October 9th.
I have one question on that, because Nancy Bankhead wanted to know what our council's official policy is going to be on BART to North Livermore. Is this something you would see happening at that conversation?
Yes, if you would make, and I'm assuming what the reference was to, essentially was to the maintenance yard area north of the freeway.
Well, I took it as, maybe specifically that, but more generally, we need I think what I heard the suggestion is that we as a council need to kind of react to what we're seeing and let the community
there's
know
a
that.
couple pieces in there related, and one is there's a timeline on your response, essentially, on the technical adequacy of the environmental document. That's the actual item that will be before you. The policy decision of whether it's a good idea, whether you like it, that's slightly different, and we can certainly, have the meeting to deal with that as well. But obviously, as all of you know, we are working with our regional partners involved in that process as well. But this very specific step is on the technical merits of whether that document has done its job, because that document might either be used by BART or by another agency at some point if we were to build something.
I think the request was that at some point we go past that technical stuff
Questions whether you
and
do that in
actually have an
October or not.
opinion. So when would we do that then? Is that what this is?
I would
pleasure the council on that one.
I would suggest keeping the comments to the technical aspects of the EIR at this point. There are so many moving pieces with the regional partners that I think any kind of policy decision or statement at this time is completely premature. The technical aspects, we could spend a good amount of that evening just discussing their ridership numbers, their parking statistics, their headways, their requirements for, the full maintenance yard in North Livermore. So
we don't have to do all that now. But
right. I'm just saying that's the technical scope that I'm trying to lay out.
The request, though, at Citizens Forum was for a date when we might have a policy from the council. So I guess I'm requesting, when do we think that would happen?
Why don't we bring that information back to you as to setting a date, because part of it's going to have to do with your work on the specific plan as well. And so what we will do is bring that information back so that you can set a date based on the other pieces of the puzzle that have to happen. We'll do that at the October meeting where you'd sort of set that date in the future.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. We want to be responsive to the request.
We do have a deadline for the EIR. That's what I was questioning.
And then you can give us direction on the next step.
Yep.
That's it? Okay. Yes, we, Councilmember Carling already mentioned the police swearing in, and on August 31st, Councilmember Werner and I were both at the LAVMA meeting, which is why we weren't at the Vine, and the LAVMA meeting didn't get out until almost 7:30, so there was no way to get down there, but best wishes were with
The
you.
chairman just didn't get it done.
Well, so then August 23rd, I was at the Livermore Valley Chamber of Commerce, where I heard the BART EIR presentation for the third time, made comments. And Saturday was really very cool. Saturday, I had the opportunity to make a presentation at Stanford University to the Global Innovation Cities Symposium. And I was talking about the city of Livermore and using garbage fees to contribute to the arts and create the Bankhead Theater, which then resulted in the revitalization of the downtown, and also talking about the South Livermore Valley Area Plan and the preservation of vineyard lands and expansion of those. Quite a bit of enthusiasm about those. So that was exciting. Again, today we were at Fire Station number 9 this morning. Following, I went to ACTC, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, the 580 Express Lane. Got an update on the operations of that. So far in fiscal years 2016, 2017, it's taken in almost $10 million. The excess dollars will be used to contribute to transit projects within that corridor. Almost 8 million trips on the express lanes so far. With the Planning and Policy Committee, we talked about some modifications that were made just on Friday to the RM3 proposals. So Alameda County is getting more. The more of those dollars, that's important. The Transit Committee had some really interesting stuff. We talked about the what are called TNCs, which are Transportation Network Companies. That's like Uber and Lyft. And the average day in San Francisco, there are 170,000 Uber and Lyft trips every day. At peak periods, there are somewhere around 6,000 drivers. And every day, there are 570,000 vehicle miles traveled just in San Francisco. And of course, this is impacting public transit, buses, taxi cabs, because people are taking Uber and Lyft. So that was kind of a revelation. With that, we've got a workshop coming up on Wednesday, September 13th, I believe from 6 until 9, is it?
From 7.
Oh, 7 until 9? Okay, so 7 until 9 on Wednesday, and that's at the Shrine Event Center.
Yes.
And so encourage the community to come down. When's the next large one? There's 2 of them.
October 10th.
Okay, October 10th is the next one. That's at Robert Livermore Center. And then there's several also in your neighborhoods. The council will not be attending those because we're going to be collecting all this input, and we don't want to be there and perhaps influence the outreach. We're here to collect the information from the outreach. So we're not going to be at these events. It's not because we're not interested in them. It's that we don't want to influence the outreach. We want to collect that information. This isn't about advocacy. It's about outreach. And we all want to hear what the community has to say. And we're going to get all that information at once the staff has done their job collecting all that information. So that's where we are. So with that, there being no further business, we will adjourn until the next meeting. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock, straight up.
Yep.
The Livermore City Council meeting and the Pleasanton City Council meeting live right here on TV 29, your connection to the Tri-Valley.